IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Happy Thursday. It is April 10th, which means we're only a couple days away from the Blue Gold game. I am excited. I love any excuse I can to be up in that stadium. Lauren and I will be up there. We're linking up with Bryan and Ange. I know they're going to be up there. I know Sean Davis and his wife are going to be up there. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see everybody. Actually going to be my first time meeting Sean Davis in person, which is also really exciting. But before we get there, we have some Notre Dame football to talk about. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about really picking up the conversation that we had on Tuesday with the offense. And today we're going to be looking at it through a defensive lens. Now, quick refresher, on Tuesday we talked about, what were the strengths of this team in 2024? And is Notre Dame in a position where those position groups and those units are going to be strengths in 2025? So on defense, we broke it down. We're going to talk about secondary, linebackers, defensive tackles, DNs, the pass rush as a whole. So there's going to be a lot of different things that we are going to cover today. And Bryan, I'm excited to get into it and talk about everything that we need to talk about today, man.
Yeah, me too. It's kind of funny where I felt like when we were talking about the offense, it's just like, man, there's so many questions, and we didn't see this guy, we didn't see that guy, we didn't do this, and in the middle of the show, Trev starts kind of like kind of making this like face, like, man, it's like I'm thinking something happened in the chat. Somebody said something in the chat that he was kind of annoyed by or something, and they start thinking, it's like, man, you start thinking about this defensive, it's going to be such a different story on defense, and it is true. And look, I think the offense has a chance to be very good in the fall, better than it was last year. A lot of work still needs to be done because of so many guys were out and new quarterback and all that other kind of stuff. But when you look at it, Trev, the defense was kind of also a question mark coming into the spring, mainly because of you had a couple things. You were replacing a very successful defensive coordinator who did a phenomenal job at Notre Dame, laying a foundation in 2022 and then building on that to create a top 10 defense in 2023, and then what I believe to be a top 5 defense in 2024. And so now you look at it, and Chris Ash steps into the lead role now. He's got to keep this thing going. Fortunately for Notre Dame, they were able to keep all the key assistants in place, which I think makes his job easier. They've been able to add some really good analysts. Andy Buh is a guy that is now part of that senior analyst role. He's a longtime Power 5 defensive backs coach. So they've really upgraded some of the support staff this offseason as well as bringing in Chris Ash. And the hope is that Chris Ash will be able to kind of keep this thing rolling. At the end of the day, we don't know whether he will or won't. That won't be determined until the fall. We've had some opinions of what we've seen so far from Chris Ash in practice, and we like what we see in the focus of certain things. And I put some intel on the board about sort of how he's building in this spring. And so far, everything is good so far. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what Chris Ash does in practice. He's going to be evaluated by what he does in the fall. The optimism, Trev, as we kind of look at this defense and why there's a level of excitement about what this group can be is because when we're at practice, even the limited practices we've been at, it's you start thinking about like, man, this is going to be a fun year. Like this, there's so much talent on this defense. Like I was talking to Brian Smith the other day, and we were kind of talking about the season and, talking about, when we want to get Brian back on the show and what were we going to talk about, different things like that. We just got to talk about Notre Dame. Is no matter what Brian calls me about or what I call him about, we start talking about Notre Dame at some point in time. That's been that way for over 20 years. You know what I mean? But it's like, dude, we've seen a lot of ups and downs during our lives as Notre Dame fans. And I said to him, I was like, it is amazing how fast how long and fast this defense is. And that's what gets you excited. So, there's still some questions that need to be answered. The defense didn't have its full assortment of weapons either this spring. No Jordan Patelho, no Boubacar Traore, no Jalen Stroman. We didn't see Devontae Smith in the scrimmage. He's fine. It's just kind of, resting him. There's still some big-time freshmen that are going to still have to show up. Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary are both going to be at the Blue Gold game this Saturday, but they're going to be, not here as enrolled players yet because they're still in high school finishing things up. You've got Anthony Sacca, borderline top 100 player, still has to show up. Chris Burgess hasn't shown up yet. You think about how good the defensive line looked this spring. We haven't even seen Chris Burgess show up yet, who's, one of those get off the bus first guys, with how he looks, and you start getting excited about, man, with the continuity from an assistant coaching standpoint and the talent they got coming back, it's hard not to get excited about this defense, Trev. It really isn't. Even though coming into the spring, I would honestly admit that I was a little bit like, you got to replace Xavier Watts and Benjamin Morrison and Howard Cross and Riley Mills and Jack Kaiser. It's not a lot of dudes. Jordan Clark. It's not a lot of dudes. Rod Hurd. I keep thinking of more dudes, so maybe it's more than I think, but it's not a lot of guys. It's not like a high volume of players, but it's some very key, important, productive, talented players, and all your captains. I mean, you lost 3 captains on defense, right? I mean, Riley Mills, Benjamin Morrison, Xavier, actually 4. Riley Mills, Xavier Watts, Benjamin Morrison, and Jack Kaiser. You lost 4 captains from your defense. Are you really going to be able to keep this thing rolling with all those losses? And we're going to spend the next however long this show is explaining to you why we believe that answer is yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and, in comparison to the conversation that we had on Tuesday, you listed off a lot of the players that aren't here yet on defense, but we got to see in the practices that we were able to attend, the core pieces were there, which I think gives you a level of comfort because opposite of the offense, who we didn't get to watch Billy Schrouth and Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner and Ashton Craig and Malachi Fields. You know what I mean? Like the core pieces names start stacking up a little bit. But on defense, we did get to see Bryce Young. We did get to see the interior defensive line. We did get to see Drake Bowen and Jalen Sneed and Kingston and Jaden Osbury and Leonard Moore and Christian Gray, and the list goes on and on and on. So the question marks on offense are around what will the core pieces look like versus on defense. It's like, okay, what are these exciting newcomers going to look like? And I use newcomers for, the Jalen Stromans and the Mark Zachary's and Dallas Goldens. And so it's a little bit of a different picture. But I'm with you, man. My confidence has grown in this defense over the spring. And it really started to highlight, one, I'm a lot more comfortable with Chris Ash hire. Still have yet to see what he's able to do in a game because that is a big factor. But it really sunk in that they have all of their returning assistant coaches back too. And that's something that I think that is huge.
Shaun, you ready to go? So apparently Shaun got the memo that it's no hat day at Irish Breakdown. Because we were talking before the show. I said, Trev, why is it that every time I'm not going to wear a hat or I decide not to wear a hat, you decide not to wear a hat? And he's like, he goes, but don't worry. He's like, it's going to be weird because Shaun's going to be the only guy when he jumps in the show, the only guy wearing a hat. And then I see Shaun get down in the thing and he's ready to go. I'm like, okay, apparently nobody's wearing hats today. We're not doing – I feel weird, man. I'm going to put a hat on. This ain't right. I got to put a hat on, guys. I'm sorry. It's creeping me out a little bit. No hats in the show. We got to get this thing going. But, Shaun, the thing that we were talking about before we kick off with the secondary talk is even though there's questions remaining and there were questions coming into the spring, we won't know really what Chris Ash is able to do until we get to games. It's just the rep. But coming out of the spring, we feel like we're extremely confident that the elite defense we've seen the last couple of years is going to continue because of, simply put, you return all your key assistants. Chris Ash has got a quality track record at minimum, and at the end of the day, the talent and the depth of talent, even without no Jordan Patelho, no Boubacar, no Jalen Stroman, even without those guys out there, is really, really, really talented.
And as much as you think about the guys that are being subtracted, the 2 defensive tackles, big time secondary loss with Xavier Watts, leadership in Jack Kaiser, a man who's played more Notre Dame football than anybody in the history of the program. You still have hope because you looked at the end of the season and you saw there is room for growth. Yes, it's definitely a dominant defense, but there are still areas where we can grow to become more dominant. And you start to see those hopes springing forth in spring practice. You start hearing about the depth along the defensive line, especially on the interior. You get a little excited. You hear about Jason Onyé. You hear about Armel Mukam. You hear about Brennan Vernon making plays. You get a little excited because you felt like that was one of the missing links, right? And then you feel even more comfortable with the linebackers coming back intact, like you said. And then we're going to get to in the secondary, you start to see all of these pieces that seemed to even fortify what was already a formidable defense to make it even greater. And you start to ask the question, can this defense actually be better than it was last year, right? That's a tall task against a much more difficult schedule. We have to put that in context as well. Tall task with a more difficult schedule. But from a talent standpoint and a roster standpoint, very capable, a very capable defense of once again being a top 5 defense. And for me, the metric that I'm going to be watching to let me know, we talked about the differential on Monday, Bryan, that you look at traditionally national championship teams have a differential of at least 2.4 difference between yards given up and yards gained on the ground. So if they can get to that, Notre Dame was at 1.9 last year. If they can shave some off of that from the, giving up 130 on the ground to even if they can get to 105, that's going to go a long way to what we see this Notre Dame defense being able to do. And it's not really about consistency. It's about what can you do and what can you impact when you go up against the best offenses. That's going to be the next step for this defense. We know what you can do against 90% of college football, but what about that upper echelon offense that's just as talented as you? What can you do when you face those type of high-octane offenses? That's the next step for this defense.
Just a reminder before we get going into the show that we obviously, what we would love it if you guys could go ahead and do us a solid and hit that like button for us. Obviously, you're going to see that little thumbs up right below. It's probably a little bit right below Shaun, maybe a little bit to his left looking at him now. You see that big thumbs up button. Go ahead and hit that for us. Also, a reminder that tonight we will also, I'm actually going to double up today. I'm going to be busy today. I'm going to be on the show at 5 o'clock. Shaun Stiers and I are going to get together. We're going to talk a little recruiting tonight. Not sure what the topic's going to be, but we're going to talk a little bit of recruiting tonight. So you're going to want to join us for a very special edition of the IB Nation Sports Talk tonight, because it'll be Shaun Stiers and I. We're talking about, we haven't done a show together, just me and him, in over a year. So that'll be a lot of fun. And just want to remind everybody about that. We'll be going live at 5 o'clock by then to talk about recruiting. There may be some news around then. We don't know. We're going to have to see. But we're going to talk about that tonight at 5 o'clock. So without further ado, Trev, I want to kick things off by looking at this. The way we're kind of having this conversation is we're looking first at the things that we viewed as what were the strengths of the team last year. What were the truly dominant areas of this team last year? Sometimes it was the entire season. Sometimes like the secondary. Sometimes it was during stretches of the season, which is linebacker and D tackles. And then we're going to talk in part 2 sort of about the areas that maybe weren't quite the strengths they need to be that elite group. And I think that really comes down to the defensive end position specifically. And then we'll talk a little bit about the pass rush and run defense and kind of what our thoughts are on that just a little bit as well. So I think the best place to start with this, Trev, is the secondary, because I don't think there's any doubt that secondary was the strength of this team the last 2 years. Last year, Notre Dame had to overcome some key losses. Obviously, you lost Cam Hart and you lost DJ Brown. You lost Thomas Harper, who did a very good job. The question is, could you keep it rolling? And in a lot of ways, I think the secondary was even better last year. I think it was better in certain areas against the run. It was better in coverage, I believe, last year. Other areas maybe not quite as good against the run, but I thought Xavier Watts was better than he was the year before. I thought Leonard Moore, the combination of Benjamin Morrison in the boundary for the first 6 games and then Leonard Moore in the boundary for the last 10 games meant your boundary position was still very strong. And, overall, I'd say you could argue that the secondary was every bit as good as it was the year before. Maybe slightly better, maybe not quite as good in certain areas, but just overall dominance, I think it's right kind of where it was the year before. Now the question is, okay, it's not – a lot of times, Shaun, it's not the first year you lose players that get you. It's the second year you lose players that get you. And when you look at it, that's kind of where we are now with the Notre Dame secondary. Can they handle the back-to-back years of big losses? You lose Cam Hart, DJ Brown, Thomas Harper in 1 year, and then the very next year you lose Benjamin Morrison, you lose Rod Hurd, you lose Jordan Clark, and of course you lose maybe the greatest safety to ever play for you in college in Xavier Watts. There's no way, Shaun, no way that the secondary is going to be able to be as good next year as it is this year, right?
It's a possibility when you really think about it. I want people to stay with us when we talk about this and talk it through, right? Because I know immediately the first reaction is, oh my God, are you saying there's somebody in the secondary better than Xavier Watts? Absolutely not. Could there be someone better or just as good in year 2 if they play this year?
Yeah, there won't be anybody as good as Xavier Watts this year. Not this year.
Yes. No. However, what I do love about this secondary is the incredible depth and versatility. I really started thinking about this, like the versatility of Mike Mickens being able to switch, especially with what we hear about Jalen Stroman, watching him play. Adon Schuler taking that next step. See, that's really going to be the key. The assumption that Adon Schuler, being under the tutelage of Xavier Watts, is going to take that next step that Marcus Freeman mentioned, I believe, last week when he said, yo, he was just one of the smartest and most physically gifted safeties you could ever have. He was always in the right spot. He was always able to make the right play and anticipate and come up with that big play at the right moment. Well, if some of that rubs off on Adon Schuler, and Adon Schuler had a fantastic first year as a starter, if he takes a step up and then he allows the other players to play complementary to him the same way he was complementary to Xavier Watts, now you start cooking with grease. He's talking about the nickel was done very well. I think, hey, Jordan Clark played very well in the nickel. But we all suspect that Devontae Smith might just be a little bit better at the nickel. Then you get both of your defensive backs in their second years as starters. So you presume that they're going to be better. Then you start talking about how can we mix in a kid like Luke Talich, who is very steady, solid, long, rangy, a little bit more athletic than people might give him credit. Kennedy Urlacher's actually figuring things out in coverage. Now we can really use, man, he can be a chess piece. Like, do you want to use him as a blitzer? Do you want to use him to come down into the box and then move some other people around? I just really think this secondary, for a different reason, can be a little bit better or deeper than last year's secondary when you primarily depended upon two guys on the back end, which in my opinion is going to allow Adon Schuler and some of those other guys, because Mike Mickens likes to play his guys. He likes to get them early, especially early in the season, get his younger guys in the rotation. I think that's going to keep them fresher. But with everything said, Xavier Watts is not going to be replaced this year at the high level of play that he left Notre Dame. However, when you talk about everything, and you have to think about this guys, if Chris Ash really is talking about disguising and doing lots of different things, the depth and the versatility is going to make you feel much better. And I feel much better, honestly. Let's say if Xavier Watts was out for a game, the feeling last year would have been, oh boy, Xavier Watts is not playing. Let's say Adon Schuler is the best player on the back end, and we hear Adon Schuler is not going to play this week. He has a sprained ankle. I think we feel a little bit better about what's behind him or what they have to be able to mix and match. Like, can they move Stroman into his slot and then move somebody else into the free safety spot? That for me, that's the strength, and that's something they might not have had last year that Mike Mickens might have in his back pocket this year, right? Can we take up Bronte Johnson, who was backing up Leonard Moore at the end of the year? As we watched, we love this film. We talked about how rangy and athletic he was in high school. So if that's what you have on the back end, you feel very confident about that. It's just so many different combinations of really good players that exist at the safety position. And you know what you have at the nickel, and you know what you have at defensive back. And once again, we're hearing about another young, unheralded defensive back that Mike Mickens identified as a freshman. Of course, he has a guy flashing in spring. That is Mike Mickens. of course, he has a guy that everybody else was like, I don't see it. I don't see what's so special about him. And now Christian Gray calls him Benjamin Morrison 2.0. This is one of those things that you look at, and like you asked the question, Bryan, can they possibly be better? We'll wait and see. But I mean, there are some signs there that might lend you to say, yeah, it's a possibility that this secondary might be better.
Trev, there's two things that to me that go into being an elite secondary. Number one is you need star power. And number two is unit strength. When it comes to star power, and we saw a guy emerge last year in Leonard Moore, and he hasn't missed a beat this spring. I mean, isn't that always a question with a young guy that kind of breaks out at me? It was the same question we had about Benjamin Morrison after year one, and you always kind of have that, okay, this guy broke out in year one. Where's his headspace at? Is he kind of in the, I've arrived, I'm the man now, everybody love me, give me my money and all that kind of stuff? Or is he hungrier to be even better next year? And that's not a Leonard Moore specific question. I asked that question about everybody. I asked that question about Jeremiah Love with the breakout season he had. I asked that question, if an offensive lineman comes out and breaks out this year, it's okay, is he going to do that? If whoever starts a quarterback this year goes and breaks out, I'll ask that question about him next year. It's just, that's always the question when the circumstances change for a player. This time a year ago, Leonard Moore was in high school. He wasn't even done with high school yet, right? I mean, and then coming into fall camp, he was a hungry kid trying to prove his way. Well, now he's kind of proven his way. So, Trev, the big thing is can Leonard Moore maintain that? And I know he did an interview recently, and I liked your impression that you had of your takeaway combined with what we've seen in practice. It seems like Leonard Moore is not satisfied with the player he was a year ago, or even more so, the results that the team had a year ago. And I think that's obviously big, is that star power foundation has been laid with Leonard Moore.
Yeah, it's Leonard Moore and Christian Gray both, if I'm being honest with you. And they attacked their interviews in two different ways. For Leonard Moore, it was, hey, look, man, you were an FWAA freshman All-American, freshman defensive team. You had a great season. You stepped in. And then for Christian Gray, a lot of the questions were, hey, man, Ohio State was rough. How long did that linger with you? And he was like, a day. He was like, I knew it was time to get back to the lab. When we start talking about the secondary as a whole being better, I'm far enough removed from the magical season that 2024 was, where I'm looking at it from more of an analytical standpoint than what I would have, say, January 22nd, if that makes sense. And when somebody asked me, do I think that the secondary can be better? My answer, and I'll just rip the Band-Aid off, I think it's yes. Can they be? Absolutely. Which might be shocking to some because of the losses that you had. But I think when you evaluate the room as a whole and what 2024 was for the secondary, I would make the argument that some of the issues the secondary did have, because they weren't a perfect group in 2024. I don't think any three of us on this show would say, oh, they did nothing wrong for 16 games. And when you look at it, I think the breakout of Leonard Moore and the outstanding play of Xavier Watts kind of masked some of the things that we may have highlighted if one of those things didn't happen. You go through and you look at it. I don't think we saw the best of Ben Morrison in 2024 because of the injury. I don't think he played bad. Not at all. Bryan, you and I have had extensive conversations about this.
And disagreements on that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think Benjamin Morrison had one bad game.
Yeah.
The same week that everybody not named Xavier Watts had a bad game.
Yeah.
But I still felt he was every bit as good as he was the year before. It's just, I think the expectations changed.
Sure.
We thought he was going to be better. He wasn't necessarily better, but he was every bit as good as he had been.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where my disagreement was. But to your point, though, Trev, a lot of that was that he was nursing that shoulder injury that he suffered during the spring, which kind of slowed things down. But I still think he was really good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I still think for that time, he was still the best corner on the team. But I'd go as far as say we didn't get to see the best of him, because the question always poses, what if Ben Morrison played against Ohio State?
Because he was going to be better as the season wore on and he got more strength in that shoulder and he got more reps. He was going to get better. Correct. And I think we were going to see the best version of Benjamin Morrison in October or in November and then into the playoffs. And I think he would have risen to the challenge of having to go against Indiana and Georgia and Penn State and Ohio State. You are correct. But like you said, unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to see that. And I think that hurt the team last year, Trev. But we always talk about this. Okay, what are you going to do about it? All right, Leonard Moore is this is why you recruit the way you recruit. This is why you develop. This is why you get Leonard Moore all those reps early in fall camp, so that if his number is called, you go, because he had to start at 2 different positions last year. He had to start at the field position and the boundary position last year. And of course, he turned into a star. And you now, as we say again, we go into this season and you've got that star power.
Oh, yeah.
There's part 2, though, Shaun. And this is kind of what has us excited about this room. And that is unit strength. I don't know if there's another All-American on this group right now. Like right now. There's no one that I say, okay, this guy right now, I'm confident is going to be that second All-American on the team like I felt they would have had. Like, I think by the end of the year, Benjamin Morrison was pretty good early in the year. I think if he played all year and kept playing, he would have been an All-American caliber player. I think he kind of was early. He hadn't given up a touchdown all season in 6 games. You know, his completion percentage allowed was better than it was the year before. That was going against Louisville, who basically just ignored him the entire game and picked on. Think about that. Benjamin Morrison and Leonard Moore were on the field at the same time, and Louisville picked on Leonard Moore the entire game and completed, I think, like 6 or 7 balls on him. He played well. The balls they completed on him had to be dimes, but you know he played well. He was going to be an All-American caliber player or an All-American player, especially with Will Johnson getting hurt. Whether it's first team, second team, he was going to be an All-American. And you had 2 All-Americans on the secondary last year, in my opinion. I believe you had 2 All-Americans in the secondary in 2023, maybe 3, because I still think Cam Hart, Benjamin Morrison, and Xavier Watts all played at an All-American level. Maybe they're not always recognized as such, but they played on that level. Who is that second player? We don't have an answer to that right now. And that'll be one of those things that has to emerge. There's a lot of potential options. You've got Christian Gray. You've got a Don Schuler, maybe even a guy like a Devontae Smith, who I thought played really well last year in the nickel and is now going to be in a system that I think really fits his skill set well. But it's not just those guys. The difference, I believe, in this group and last year's group, like Shaun, I would say that I want to give Rod Hurd a little bit of love and say that they had a good 3-man unit at safety last year. Rod Hurd had some very important moments. I think of the forced fumble against, what was it? Who was it? Virginia. You think of the pass breakup on 4th down that he had against Georgia when that game was still in doubt. You know, Rod Hurd gave some very important minutes. Maybe he wasn't the impact player that we thought he was going to be, but let's also consider that part of that was because of a Don Schuler kind of stepping up and becoming that guy. I think Rod Hurd did a good job for Notre Dame last year. But it was that, though. It was that 3-man group, and that was it. And at cornerback, once you lost Benjamin Morrison, you were and Jaden Mickey quit the team in the middle and like in the kind of early part of the year. You were a 2-man cornerback room the entire year. And when I look at the team now, and this is where Shaun was discussing this, what I love about the unit now and where a lot of my optimism of why it has a chance to be better next season and maybe the best secondary that Mike Mickens has put on the field so far. Obviously, you need to make sure that Chris Ash is putting them in position to be successful with this coverage calls and things like that. We'll find that out. Is the depth of talent is so much greater, and the length on this team is so much greater than I've ever really seen it. And so it's not just a Don Schuler at safety. The question we had was, well, what else happens after that? We saw in the open scrimmage what I have heard has been evident all spring, which is that the safeties, other than a Don Schuler, are really impressive. And every time I ask somebody about one of the safeties, they immediately want to talk about another one. So if I bring up Kennedy Urlacher, they want to start talking about somebody else. If I bring up somebody else, they want to talk about Kennedy Urlacher. I mean, that's just kind of how it's been all spring. You know, I was told by a source that the day before the Jersey scrimmage, Jadon Blair had 2 big picks and 2 pass breakups during team periods and 7-on-7 periods. So it's like, and then we saw Bronte Johnson, who might have been the most impressive safety of all of them in the scrimmage we were at. And we're not even talking about the play that Ethan Long made coming from the backside to squeeze on a backside seam route and break that pass up. Luke Talich has been impressive so far this spring. It's the depth of talent, guys, that has me so excited about what this group can be. That's the thing that stood out to me the most. I mean, we didn't get a chance to see Carson Hobbs play corner in the scrimmage because they were working on him at nickel. But we've been impressed with him, and I've heard very good things about what Carson's doing this spring as well, where, if his number gets called, first of all, he'll highly likely going to be part of the rotation. And we'll see him play more as part of the rotation this year than we saw last year when he was still a freshman. And I think they were kind of wanting to preserve a year of eligibility and just not comfortable necessarily throwing him into those high leverage moments just yet. There's a lot more comfort in that with him now. Will he be a guy that can play to the level that Christian Gray did 2 years ago or Leonard Moore did last year coming off the bench? We'll see. There's a lot more confidence there. And then, of course, you're bringing in one of the best cornerback classes in the entire country. Cree Thomas, we've already seen. He's a work in progress. I'm not asking Cree Thomas to be what Benjamin Morrison was as a freshman. I don't think that's fair. And I know the comment that Cree said and those guys said, and Benjamin Morrison. This is what I love about that group. Benjamin Morrison said, hey, I think Christian Gray could end up being the best guy in the room. And Christian Gray thinks that Cree Thomas is the next Benjamin. That's what I love about this group. It's like, no, let me deflect this over to my guy over there who's doing a great job. And then you add Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary to the mix in the summer. It's young. It's very young. And that's the thing that I have to remind myself, that a lot of these guys playing are still really young. They're going to make some mistakes, especially as you mix up coverages more. There's going to be some mistakes. But I think this unit's going to make even more impact plays than what we saw from the secondary the last 2 years, which is kind of crazy to think about when you consider how many impact plays this secondary has made the last couple of years, when you talk about the corners and then, of course, Xavier Watts at safety. And, Shaun, you nailed it. They're not a bunch of cookie cutters. I think Jadon Blair and Luke Talich and Bronte Johnson are all kind of in the same boat as players, but then you've got – they're both very different from a Don Schuler. They're all three very different from a Don. And then Kennedy's just like this heat-seeking missile over there at the other spot as part of this conversation too. But they're all athletic. They're all rangy. They can all play and they can all hit. And the other thing too that I noticed on Saturday, the whole unit plays with a ton of confidence. A ton of confidence. That's partly identifying players that have that naturally. The other part of it is you can tell very much that they have faith in the coaching that they're receiving as well. And that's where I start to say, I actually do think that this secondary has a chance. I'm not ready to predict it yet, but has a chance to, at the very least, match last year's group. But I think it has a chance to be better. I'll actually be shocked, Shaun, if it does take a step back. The question is, will it be better?
Yeah, Trev, you did a great job writing about it. When you talk about Leonard Moore and Christian Gray, listen to their interviews. Leonard Moore saying, I don't want to give up anything. You didn't give up much last year. Now you're just dedicating your entire offseason and not giving up a darn thing next year. And then Christian Gray readily and openly admitting, I got to work on my off man. I love to bump and run. I can play zone, but that off man, why? Because I love to sit. I love to sit on routes. So I need to do a better job technically being able to open up and run and then not grab so much when I get in chase technique. And then don't be so down on yourself when somebody just drops a dime. When somebody drops a dime, they drop the dime. Move on to the next play, but identifying what they need and having the desire to get to the next level in their game. And with Leonard Moore, he had success similar to what Benjamin Morrison had early on. And then Christian Gray, similar to what we heard about and what people thought about Cam Hart early on. Well, I don't think he's that good. This, that, and the other. And it's like, all right, that's fine. And then all of a sudden, the last year in Notre Dame, oh man, he might have played better than Benjamin Moore.
I mean, Cam Hart was phenomenal his last 2 years at Notre Dame. I mean, it's
we think so.
It's funny how that is.
Yeah,
because the problem is, from a fan standpoint, you only really see cornerbacks when they're getting the ball thrown at them. You don't see the 90+% of the snaps, the ball's never coming their way. I do think people came around to Cam Hart. I don't know anybody that didn't think Cam Hart was really good as last year, but
he didn't give him any choice. He didn't give him a choice that last year.
But he was outstanding. You really can't. The thing is, I struggle to say where's the weakness in the secondary. Maybe they don't have 3 All-Americans like they did 2 years ago, but they also had some areas where in certain spots you were going to go here. 3rd and 19, where did Ohio State go? They didn't throw at Benjamin. They didn't throw at Cam. They didn't throw at Xavier. They said, we're going to go right at Ramon Henderson, or we're going to go right at DJ Brown. That's where they went, and that's where they had that success. And now you look at it and you're like, well, who do you throw at now? Okay, yeah, I'm going to throw at Jadon Blair when he's in there because he's a freshman. But he's a 6'5", 210-pound freshman that can run, is really smart, and can make plays. Well, I'm going to throw at Luke Talich. Well, he's 6'4", 220, rangy, fast, and physical and instinctive. Yeah, I'm going to throw at Jalen Stroman, who's 6'1", 205, and he's the most experienced veteran player in the country. We haven't even talked about Jalen Stroman yet, who's already proven himself to be a pretty darn good football player. So, man, you just look at it and it's like, I don't know where that weakness is. But the other part of it too is, Shaun, why I'm so confident that we're going to see the best of this group is because that's the track record that Mike Mickens has earned at Notre Dame, going all the way even back to 2020, where you just know he's going to get the most out of his unit. It's assumed that's going to happen because that's what they've done. And so that's why maybe I have a little bit more optimism that this group's going to figure it out, despite its youth and inexperience in certain spots, because the position coach has got a track record of doing just that. And this year, I think he's got more depth and more talent than he's ever had. And, you know, you're seeing the fruits of his labor, because this is really the first time. This will be the first time that Mike Mickens is recruiting a secondary that he 100% recruited. Now, why I say that is because he did not recruit Cam Hart. He did not recruit Xavier Watts. Now, I do count the portal players because he recruited them to Notre Dame, even though he didn't recruit them out of high school. Although him and the staff he was early. He did recruit Devontae Smith. He just didn't pick Notre Dame. And Marcus Freeman recruited Devontae Smith at Cincinnati. Mike Mickens recruited him at both. He got on him early at Cincinnati, and then, of course, tried to recruit him at Notre Dame, offered him at Notre Dame as well. Didn't obviously recruit Jalen Stroman. This is the first time that Mike Mickens is going to have a secondary that's 100% the hand-picked players that he wanted. And that's another thing that factors in. Look, Cam Hart and Xavier Watts were phenomenal players. I'm just making the point that, like, this is now 100% a room that he has entirely constructed. And you see depth, you see length, you see speed, but there's another part to this, guys, that was evident in the practice that I don't think enough people talk about. Mike Mickens puts an incredibly high value, and I would argue it's the number one trait he looks for, on football IQ. Because Mike Mickens has turned down really talented players that liked Notre Dame because they were just athletes. They weren't the thinkers that he's looking for. They weren't the mental, like, acumen that he wants in a defensive player. There's not a single player on this roster right now that didn't earn high marks from me or from the people I talked to around the program about this part of their game. The length is obvious. The talent's obvious. He's not sacrificing athleticism for football IQ. He's saying we need those traits, but if you also don't have the football IQ, you're not going to be able to do this. And I think that's the thing. And you can kind of hear it a little bit in some of the things that Chris Ash says and the way that they're doing things already. I mean, they're already asking Jadon Blair and Bronte Johnson to play like Xavier Watts did last year with the responsibilities that they're asking to do. That says something. And so I think that's a big part of it. And that is factored into why his secondaries are so good and so productive, is that right there.
I think we can go to the pro day, right? And there were so many people that might have expected Xavier Watts to run faster. And you say to yourself, man, on film, he plays faster than that. Yeah. Because of the mental IQ. See, if you know where you're going to get there faster than somebody that has to think about it, and they might have the physical gifting. Notre Dame in that secondary, that's one of the biggest surprises last year, and one of the biggest surprises about, I'm waiting to see who that person is. Maybe you've heard something. Somebody, we didn't hear, we didn't expect to hear Kennedy Urlacher's name at all. We were talking and we were like, Kennedy Urlacher would probably be like, he needs a year to get stronger, do this, and all of a sudden coming out of last spring.
Yeah, last spring. Yep.
It's like, Kennedy Urlacher?
Mm-hmm.
Really? And people were like, yeah. And it was like, well, man, okay. And so now in this spring, it's like I'm sure somebody's name in that secondary is going to jump up and exceed what we thought they were going to be able to do because of what you just pointed out, what Mike Mickens is able to see. Like get players that actually see the game. Yeah. Leonard Moore talked about it. I don't want to just know what I'm doing. I want to know what everybody on the field is doing.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? What type of I don't hear a lot of primetime defensive backs, lockdown defensive backs, actually contemplating what everybody else is doing. A lot of them are just like, I got this over here.
Right.
Like, you guys take care of the rest. I have this side of the field locked down. When you hear that, you can tell it's a message. It's a continual message that's spoken about. You talked about how they are humble and show each other love and point to one another. It's a message in that room. We talk about how the offensive line historically moves as a pack and how they operated in Notre Dame. Mike Mickens is building that same type of community in that defensive room, the defensive back room. And you have to love it, man. I don't think it's far-fetched to say that they could be better. Mm-hmm. I just really don't. And I think, is it fair to say they're starting to recruit a different type of athlete?
Oh, it's already there, in my opinion, Shaun. I think that's already been done. I mean, when you look at the room, you look at Christian Gray, who's now a junior. He was a top 100 player that Notre Dame beat Ohio State and LSU for. You look at Leonard Moore. I mean, he was recruited to be this kind of player. If anyone that knows Mike Mickens knows that this is not his performance, just like Benjamin Morrison's performance, was not a surprise to Mike Mickens. And sometimes guys do break out, and it's a bit of a surprise. Like, hey, we weren't expecting that guy to be as good as he was early on. We've heard that from coaches before. That wasn't the case with those two guys. And you look at Jadon Blair. He was recruited to be a star. Bronte Johnson was recruited to be an impact player. That's not a surprise. And they didn't recruit Kennedy Urlacher because he was a one-trick pony. They thought he had the traits to be an all-around player. If not, however, then you can play him in that one role. And those are the things that they talk about. They want guys that are high football IQ players. Listen to Jalen Stroman talk for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and you're going to be like, okay, yeah, I see how he's a fit in this room. That's an intellectually kid. That's a thought. He thinks about the game. He's not just out there like, I got to get mine. I got to do my thing. You understand it, and that's what great defensive backs are. I mean, I know that like we look at Deion Sanders as a player, and we see the flash and the jewelry, but you talk to anybody that played with him, they'll tell you that guy was a really smart football player. You know, you think about all the great players, that 9 out of 10 of them at the very least were guys that were also great thinkers of the game. And that's something that that's why I say Mike Mickens values that. He recruits that. And if you don't have that, I don't know if you're going to fit at Notre Dame. And that's a big part of it is when you look at it, it's that football IQ part of it that leads me to believe that, Shaun. And that's why I say I have the utmost confidence the secondary at the very least is going to be every bit as good as it was last year, and has a chance to be even better, because that's exactly what we thought about last year. And this year's team is even deeper than last year's team because of the recruiting that he's done. And to your question, Shaun, the only guy that I even think has a chance to be that surprise player is Cree Thomas and Kennedy Urlacher. Because everybody else is we expect them to do certain things. Like, Bronte Johnson was a top 100 recruit on my board. I don't know that anyone's surprised that Bronte Johnson looks good as a sophomore. You know what I mean? Like, that shouldn't shock anybody.
I'm interested in, I heard, just listening to a lot of the feedback that came out of the practice this weekend. I heard someone that I had as one of my sleepers in the 24 class. In the 25 class, I'm sorry, but 24 class was Taven Benny Powell. Like, I love that kid in the secondary. And I always wondered, like, okay, is he going to put on weight and they move him up inside the to the linebacker room, or do they let him play safety? And hearing that he's out there looking good, it's like, okay, that was unexpected, because I thought he might take a little bit more time, but to hear that he's out there flashing as well. And you might be, because I don't want to.
I hadn't heard that, Sean. Where did
I
you
just
hear
heard it from a couple of other people that said they flashed. That's why, you listen to different perspectives.
Yeah.
Someone might see a certain play.
Yeah, I didn't see
him
doing much.
But it wasn't like anything big. It was just like, oh man, he made a play one time.
Ben Minnick looked good in the practices we've seen so far. That's another.
And they've been working him at nickel, right? All you hear is about Devontae Smith, and you hear about Carson Hobbs working.
You know what's funny that people don't know? He's one of their fastest DBs. People don't think about that. Ben Minnick's one of their fastest DBs.
Oh, absolutely. But you talk
about
small
and undersized and is injury prone, but like he can freaking run.
Remember when he was playing in high school his senior year, he was playing next to a 5-star that everybody came to see on a weekly basis. But in the big games, Ben Minnick was always the one making the big play, right? And so that was the thing that jumped off for us when we were, talking about his recruitment, is that this kid is talented and probably a little bit more athletic than people give him credit for, because he's always next to this super talented athletic safety week to week, and they forget that this kid is athletic, just as athletic. So I'm not shocked at all to hear anything like that. Not shocked at all. At all. I'm telling you, man, the versatility, Mike Mickens has to be like, and Chris Ash, if indeed Chris Ash wants to disguise and do things different and just add a little more zone coverage to confuse offenses and to give offensive coordinators a little bit more to think about, because pretty much offensive coordinators had kind of recognized, like, second down, we're probably going to get some pressure up the middle, right? Then third down, primarily, they're going to be a man-to-man defense. And they still will be primarily a man-to-man defense, in my opinion. But if they can disguise it and give more looks pre-snap to make you think, that could help as well. But go ahead.
I don't know that that's the one thing I don't know that they had on the defense the last 2 years, was the range at safety to be as to hide things, to be as, I'm trying to think of the word that I'm looking for here, to mask things as much as you'd like to.
Right.
I don't know that they had the safeties that, like you talk about Xavier Watts' intelligence. I mean, absolutely. But he's also 5'11", 6 feet tall. There's not that same level of range as maybe a bigger player. And when you you talk about football IQ, I remember it was the Georgia game, and we talked before the game about, you got to be careful at Georgia because they're going to run a couple reverses, or they're going to do a couple things a game to try to get you. And I remember looking at the all 22 of that game, and there was that play early in the game they ran a reverse, and there's literally 10 Notre Dame players running to the direction of the action, and there's one guy running away from everyone else, and he makes the tackle for loss, and it was Xavier Watts. And you're just like, he just saw the game differently than everybody else, and that's something that I think that he was not a unicorn in that room, and in that regard, that's what we're going to start to see more of. Adon has that. Adon is a very high football IQ player, but now Adon was your rangiest guy last year athletically. Now he is not even in your top 2 or 3 of just the safeties of being the rotation. That's not a knock on Adon, but now Adon, I think, can kind of take on a little bit more of that Xavier role, coming downhill and being that smart guy, because you have some range now with the 6'4" Luke Talich, a 6'5" Jadon Blair, a 6'3" Bronte Johnson, to where now they can do some things that maybe you couldn't do the last couple of years when it came to, bringing a guy up and then flying him back. You could bring a safety down. You'll see teams do this if they've got an athletic enough guy. They'll bring a safety down like he's coming in the box. He'll get 6-7 yards off the line of scrimmage, and then snap, he just flies back and plays single high. I don't know that that's something you necessarily wanted to do a bunch against top teams with Adon and Xavier Watts. That's not playing to their strengths. They did it at times. That is something you're going to be able to do more with Tay Johnson, with Jadon Blair, with Luke Talich. And to your point, Sean, it just gives them a lot more versatility, a lot more weapons. Because we've praised Adon for he's so much like Xavier that it was a great learning experience for him to play with Xavier. But they were the same guy. And then Ron Hurd was shorter and not as fast as they were. Now it's like last year, think about it, Adon was your tallest safety last year at 6 feet tall. Now he's your shortest safety at 6 feet tall. It's a completely different dynamic, and that's where I'm excited about it. We're going to go because we can talk about the secondary for the next 2 hours. We're going to talk about the rest of the defense, but before we get there, folks, do us a little favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review on the podcast platform that you're listening to. But as always, we dropped some intel last night on the board. So if you're a premium board member, you saw that recruiting intel last night. It's about some guys that were on campus recently, some guys that are coming on campus this weekend. There's some really interesting recruiting intel on there. You're going to check that out on the boards, and you can find that as a premium member at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
All right, guys, we talked a lot about the secondary, and to Brian's point, we probably could have gone on about it for a whole other at least hour and a half. But there are some other facets of this defense that we believe were great strengths of this entire unit in 2024. We're going to kind of start breaking down where do we see them in 2025 and kind of working our way, back to front. I think now it's a good time to bring up the linebackers and start talking about what are they going to look like in 2025, because they're an interesting group. Last year it was outside of Jack Kaiser, they played a lot of youth. Jalen Sneed started to come into his own a little bit and started becoming more of a 3-down backer, not too much of a niche pass rusher on 3rd down. But, think about it. You had Kingston Viliama-Asa playing as a true freshman. You had Jaden Osbury playing as a redshirt freshman. And then you had Drake Bowen starting at Mike. He played the second most snaps, and he was a true sophomore. And so now you get all these guys back, but a year more experienced. And there's over 1,800 snaps played between Bowen, Osbury, Viliama-Asa, and Sneed. And so when you start looking at this linebacker room, where do you guys start when you start talking about what they could be in 2025? Because for me, this group has an extremely high ceiling. I know all three of us on here have been very bullish about how they can absolutely be one of the best linebacking units in the country this upcoming season, and they absolutely have the tools to do it. You could make the argument that from like top to bottom, this might be the most experienced group between the three on defense coming back. Secondary at the top is pretty loaded, but there's a lot of youth behind it. D-line, we'll talk about later in the show. A lot of questions, but the linebacking group, especially at the top, is very sound. So, Brian, what do you think about for these linebackers?
I think the big thing, guys, is we ask ourselves, like, first of all, what is the standard that they have to live up to from last season? And the standard that we saw last year was, at times, this linebacker core was very good. At times, it was prone to giving up big plays. And, we saw that in game 2. We saw that when Kingston gave up the seam route for an 80-plus yard touchdown. We saw that, Kingston biting hard backside on that play where Tyler Shuck takes it out the back door for the big play. And we saw that with Drake Bowen, with some misfits in the run game at times. We saw that with Jaden Osbury with some misfits in the run game at times, or not being a little hesitant in space and not making a play. We saw that with Jalen Sneed in the postseason, where he would have a bad run fit and allow, Georgia or Penn State or Ohio State to make a big play. It was a really talented group, and those mistakes were limited, but they were more prominent than they were the year before when you had J.D. Bertrand and Maris Leofau, who were 3rd, 4th, year players. J.D. in 2023 was what? He was going to, I think, his 3rd year as a starter, 4th year in the rotation. And Maris had been a rotation guy going all the way back to 2020 as well. And these were veteran players that had played a ton of football. Well, you're going to expect to see that kind of mistakes. And we told you guys you'd see those kind of mistakes. But we also told you last year that you're going to see more big plays from the linebacker unit. And I think we saw that last year. And so I could sit here and pick apart all the mistakes that Kingston Viliama-Asa made, but then I can point to all the big-time plays he made in 300 snaps. I can point to the mistakes that Jalen Sneed made, but also then point to some big-time plays that he made and how much more comfortable he looked in that position, especially later in the year. I can do the same thing with Jaden Osbury. I can do the same thing with Drake Bowen. I was watching, was it the Indiana game? I think it was. Or was it the Georgia game? It was the Indiana game. They try to run a screen on him. And you just watch Drake's like the only guy that really read it and just scrapes over the top and blows it up behind the line. I think it was Indiana game. He made a play like that against Georgia. And you're just like, yeah, you can live with some of the mistakes when you're going to get that type of playmaking ability. So that's where the linebacker room was last year. And let's be honest, Jack Kaiser had a lot of those same issues last year, where he made a lot more mistakes than you'd think a 6-year senior would make, because he was, even though he was a 6-year senior, he's playing a new position. And so there was still some of those mistakes from Jack last year. And the big run that Ohio State had, a lot of people blame Drake Bowen for that because he was the closest to the ball. But if you actually go watch that play, Jack Kaiser fits wrong. He didn't fit correctly, which allowed the hole to kind of get there and open that up. Those things happened to all of them last year because it's a complicated defense for the linebackers, but it was also, even the veteran was playing something that he hadn't done a whole lot in his career. It wasn't like Jack was just playing Rover again for the 5th straight year. So you had those. So now the question is, can that group maintain their playmaking ability, raise the level for their playmaking ability while limiting the mistakes to a greater degree? That's the expectation that I want to see from this room. And I don't know that we saw enough this spring to say definitively that they will be able to do that. But I did see a group that's a little bit more consistent this spring so far with their fits. I think of the one play against in the scrimmage we saw where, last year Kingston would have tried to win against the defensive tackle to make the play like he did in high school. But in the scrimmage, he just slammed hard inside of the tight end, blew him back, knows he's not making a play unless the running back cuts in incorrectly. But he knows, I'm spilling this sucker out. He does his job, blows up the tight end. The guy bounces, and I think it was Jadon Blair, it's one of the safeties. I think this one was Jadon Blair, just fills it right on the outside hole. Just the perfect inside-out fit, blows it up for a loss. Last year, I don't know that Kingston makes that play because I think Kingston's thinking, I've got to go make the play like he did in high school. Now it's like, I'm going to do my job and I'm going to blow this cat up. And if the running back makes a bad cut, I'm right there to make the play. But if he doesn't, I know my dude out there is going to go make that play. So we've seen some of that. I think Kingston's moving a little bit better than he did a year ago. Drake's now focused just on football. He's not playing baseball like he did a year ago. And, of course, we keep hearing a lot about how much improvement Jalen Snead and Jaden Alsbury have made, Trev. I know that's been a big focal point of a lot of the interviews. So even without talking about other guys, which I will, I think that foundation is laid to where I'll be shocked if the linebacker room isn't better next year even than it was last year. Legitimately shocked.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, absolutely. To me, you just look at it and you say, have we seen the best of Drake Bowen? Have we seen the best of Kingston? Have we seen the best of Snead? And have we seen the best of Ileama Asa? And I think that's a resounding, very easy answer. It's no. Because for all of the great things that they did, there were improvements to be made. The long touchdown that Georgia had to Cash Jones. Bowen's got to run with that guy. Those are going to be mistakes that get fixed with time and with experience. Last season, they were coming into it having not seen that in a game. It's different when you're doing it in practice against a scout team. Marcus Freeman in a lot of these press conferences has talked about, and his players have echoed it as well. Look, you can get reps and experience in practice, but it's different on Saturdays. It just is. And now they have that, and so I think that's going to be huge for them, because you look and you talk about clarity and how clarity equals velocity. And now they're playing with a lot more clear mind for the jobs that they're able to do this season. Yes, new defensive coordinator. There's going to be some wrinkles to what they're asked to do. But from what we've heard, a lot of it sounds like it's picking up where it's left off. Just some terminology has changed a little bit. Shaun, when you look at this linebacking group, what gives you the optimism to say this group can be better than what it was a season ago?
Well, you guys covered most of it, but for me, what stood out, and I think Marcus Freeman and Max Bullock both echoed the same thing. They were very upfront and clear. I know you guys thought that the clear leader, because of seniority, was 24, but the guy that really was one of the most vocal guys in that room was 34. Both of them said that last week. And so for them to make that clear and make that distinction, I know what the perception was.
Well, the perception was true for Jack off the field.
Right.
Jack was a great captain, great leader. But But what he was referring to there and what you're referring to, Shaun, is it was very clear to anyone paying attention that by the 5th game of the year at the latest, the captain on the field was Drake. No question.
And in the locker room, he was the vocal leader that would stand up and hold people accountable. So when you hear that, and then you hear Jalen Sneed say, I need to be a leader. When you hear Kingston say, I need to be more of a leader. Wait a minute. The whole room is talking about leadership, which goes right into that play you pointed out. See, leadership is about decreasing in yourself and playing to the greater good of everybody else. You don't do that unless you have the mindset of a leader. That's how Kingston makes that play. Because now it's not about him winning that one-on-one battle. It's about what is going to make everybody else better. What's going to make our defense better on this play? Let me go ahead and sacrifice myself right here in this slot with the tight end. And that, to hear all of them speaking the same way, that lets me know, Trev, that for me, hearing that from all of those guys and hearing what the coaches say about that position and what we're going to get to, what we're hearing up front, in the middle, particularly during the spring, that can only help. They're already good enough just based upon how they play. If they get help up front from the interior of the defensive line, and they're just allowed to run and wreak havoc along with the safeties, man, watch out. And just in general, we know this, man. College football fans are equipped or have been programmed to want the next. Like, it doesn't matter. Whoever is the next guy at the whatever position, whatever incoming freshman or the guy right behind the starter, we want to see that guy succeed, make plays. And that's just the nature of the beast, But Notre Dame is going back to the secondary, playing from a place of strength where they don't have to play these young guys. They don't have to play Ethan Long. They don't have to play Jadon Blair. They don't have to play them. So these kids are literally forcing their way on the field, right? We don't expect to see Madden for Ramo, but if he forces his way on the field, that lets you know he's ready. If a Preston Zenter forces his way into the rotation, that means he's gotten his play to such a standard that you can't keep the kid off the field.
He will.
Absolutely.
He's going to play. Matt Framo's going to play. And Preston Zenter doesn't carry himself like a guy who plans on sitting the bench this season.
No.
And honestly, Shaun, that also –
go ahead. Speak
on this. Their presence also makes sure that the older players or the guys on the field don't take a step back, because if you do – and who was it? Was it Max Bulla that said the best athlete we have at linebacker – it's not Drake, Kingston, Jalen Sneed, Jaden Alsbury, Preston Zenter, Matt Framo. Who did he say it was? Bodie Cahoon.
Who we said that looking at him, the stats he was putting up in high school.
Well, Bodie's thing was never about athleticism. Bodie's thing was always about he had to learn the position. And he still is learning the position because he played safety his whole life. And so, Shaun, to your point, though, man, it's like you're at a position now where it was not that long ago. I've talked about this before. I mean, think about the 2020 season when you had a starting will linebacker that in 12 games made like 13 tackles the whole season. And you think about that, that team had a true freshman, Clarence Lewis, who transferred out of the program last year because he just wasn't going to play, starting on that team. And you had the stars, Kyle Hamilton, you had Jeremiah Usu-Cormo. Your defensive line was pretty good that year. But it was one of those things where you had to play certain guys because you just didn't have enough bodies and athletic bodies to kind of really do that. And now you're at a point now where it's like Preston Zenter starts on that 2020 playoff team, in my opinion, at will linebacker. I have no doubt in my mind. Or maybe Mike linebacker. They might have just moved Drew White over to will and let him play a position and get him out of there, but he at least plays a ton on that team. If like the junior version of Preston Zenter gets, teleported back to 2020, and it speaks volumes. But here's the thing though about this group is the question marks for us are still, guys, how are they going to be used? I think this is the position where I'm most curious about how they're going to be used. because Al Golden had a very specific philosophy of our linebackers are essentially like they're blitzers, run blitzers and pass blitzers. I mean, they're going to play a downhill game. Does Chris Ash do that as well, or does he let them maybe flow to the ball more? Do they make more? Like, there were times where it was obvious that Jack Kaiser had no intention of getting to the football. His job was to crash a gap and eat up a gap. That was his job. There's always that to the linebacker play to a degree. But sometimes, especially when you're a one-gapping defensive line team, but sometimes there's things where, like, look, we got to give these guys the freedom to get to the ball. And Al Golden did that, but the way that they did that, it was you had to be a lot older to really understand that. The one thing that I've heard consistently from outside sources, and then also some of them in the public format, when you talk to former players of Chris Ash, the position group that more than any other you hear glowing things about him from is the linebackers. Because the way they explain it is like, our jobs were really easy. Like, the way that he taught it, it was very simple. We didn't overcomplicate it, and it allowed us to play really fast. If he continues that with this defensive group, then that's where I think the linebacker room is even better than it was last year. Because I think there's going to be more opportunities to run to the football. I think we're going to see some things from the defensive line that's going to be focused more on forcing the ball back inside to the linebackers as opposed to spilling it to the safeties like it was last year. They'll do both, as you always do, but I think we're going to see more of the other one. And that can only happen if your linebackers are more playmakers, like statistical producers. You're going to need them because of the scheme to be that. And I think that's something, Shaun, that I think we're going to see more from this group is that in theory, but I don't know that we've seen enough because of the one practice we saw. The D-line was so dominant, it was a little challenging to kind of really see the linebackers get downhill. But I think that's going to be an intriguing part. But the question that I still have, because of how little we've seen from this defense and from the team in general, is how much will the linebackers clean up those mistakes by their experience, and how much will it be potentially cleaned up because they're not asked to do as many of the things that Al Golden has to do. It's not better, it's not worse. There's always a trade-off with those two things. If you're not that way, there's things you're giving up that Al Golden got out of his linebackers. It's always the case. It's not Chris Ash's way is better than Al Golden's. It's just different. But that's going to be the question is, do we see more production, even more production from that linebacker room this year? With some of the things that we're hearing, I do think that the expectation is that we're going to see more production from the linebacker position. But the big thing is going to be they're going to have to be more consistently disciplined as a unit this season.
And what they were being, how they were being coached, I would assume, and what they were being told and how they were used really worked well with guys that were just getting their feet wet in their first year as starters, right? You want to get guys playing fast so they're not thinking, because they're going to learn as they play. Now you have guys that know the game and know the defense. So now, like you said, you can add a little bit more to their play. You can ask them to do things to whereas now you don't just come downhill, you can flow a little bit more. And so that's something that, like you said, we're going to look to see if Chris Ash, who has focused on or said he's focusing on different fundamentals and just some small tweaks here and there. And my thinking is he's doing that to be able to ask different things at every level from those players that they might not have been used to doing in last year or previous years. So I do believe Drake Bourne, I think it was Drake Bourne that said, Coach Ash told the truth. He really didn't come in and change much. He didn't. Now, to say that might be big landscape. He didn't change the playbook. The calls are still the calls. The terminology is still the terminology. However, I'm pretty sure that Drake is going to add something to his game just from simply knowing the game and being able to be given certain responsibilities that he wasn't given primarily last year. He grew into, like you said, being a guy 4 or 5 games in. Who he was after that in game 10, he was better.
You remember how tentative he was the first couple games of the year?
Absolutely.
And really, it was all the young linebackers. The first couple games of the year, they were very tentative.
Very tentative.
Because there was a lot that was asked of them. There was. That's not a bad thing. I mean, you can't completely dumb down your defense because one guy lacks the experience to do it. You have to look. This is who we got to be. This is who we got to be. So I get it, but like you said though, Shaun, the light eventually went on.
Yeah, people nitpick about this guy did this on this play and that play. You're watching somebody grow. You're watching kids grow live and in person. Like, this is what happens, whether it's quarterback or any other position. If a kid goes out there as a first-time starter, he's going to make mistakes. Just kids in life, as they grow up, they make mistakes. How are you going to coach that? Now they're making the mistakes. How are you going to coach that? How are you going to get them to recognize, I can't do that again. This is what I need to do. And be selfless. And that's why I love what all the linebackers said. They were sounding very selfless as a group. Wanting to be leaders, but sounding very selfless for the greater good of the defense. And I think that's something that's going to go a long way to them being even more effective in 2025.
Yeah. Yeah, Trev, I mean, your thoughts on this? I mean, you got to see him perform. What are your thoughts as we before we move on to some other positions?
Yeah, man, I think when you start talking about the linebacker duties from a season ago, I think it fit the youth of the room. Similar to how we talked about what Mike Denbrock had to do with the offense of like, hey, this is just who we are, and let's maximize our potential based on what we know about our team at this point. And I think Al Golden's use of the linebacking room is kind of a microcosm of that on the defensive side. It's like, hey, look, these guys are young. Drake's a first-time starter. He's a true sophomore. Jaden Ausberry's a redshirt freshman. Kingston's a true freshman. Jalen Snead, up to this point, has kind of just been a niche role player. So we're not going to ask them to drop back and cover like we might have in the past. But I think that's one of the changes that you could see this season is them doing a little bit more in pass coverage. They got a little bit more put on their plate towards the end of the year as they got more experienced. And you saw some of the mistakes. Like I said, the Cash Jones touchdown in the Sugar Bowl. Linebacker needed to go and follow him out of the backfield. And they didn't. That's the mistake that you see from a young player. But Drake Bowen's evolution last year was probably one of my favorite things to watch as the season went on. Because you think about the Texas A&M game. He was out there. He was soaking it all in. But he was a first-time starter playing in one of the biggest stadiums in college football. And there were moments where it's like, oh, man, the defense looks a little lost. He looks a little lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was a play.
Then there was some. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good, man. I think back to a play where Jaden Ausberry he subs in for Kaiser and he's trying to get lined up and he's communicating with Bowen and like they didn't do this, but the resounding answer was just kind of like, Now they made the mistake at 100 miles an hour, which is what you want to see. But then you fast forward to USC. To where he is dragging people to get lined up. He waits for USC to make their call. He barks out the call at the line of scrimmage, and then goes and makes the play.
Or he's picking up their calls. He knows they're checking. Remember that third down call against USC where they made a check, and as soon as they check, Drake's like, they're going there. Mm-hmm. They're going right there. But you could see it early in the season in flashes.
Yeah.
You think about that A&M game, which I would argue is probably Drake's worst of the year, just because, again, first start, not sure what he's doing. But there was still that one play. Do you guys remember that? Where he just flew into the hole, just blew somebody. Was it a tight end? Mm-hmm. It was a tight end. Just destroyed the guy. And you're just like, he's going to be all right. Just be patient. Give him some time. And as long as you don't have like an agenda or a preconceived idea of who you think Drake Bowen is and who should be playing the position, and you just allow your evaluation to change over time, which some people don't do. Like, we know this. Shaun, you and I were talking about this weekend. Some people just like, I had a recruiting evaluation of him, or I think somebody's a better player, so all I'm going to do is pick this guy apart, give him no praise, and wait for this guy to pass him up. And I'm just like, that might have been true in game 1, game 2, maybe even game 4. But by the middle of the year, end of the year, it's like, I don't know how you're still making that same conclusion about a first-year starter. Well, remember this early game? Yeah. Remember that early game when he was in start 1 or 2? This is a guy that played less than 100 snaps at linebacker the year before.
Yeah.
Those things are going to happen. And they happen to Jaden Ausberry. They happen to Kingston. They happen to Jalen Snead. I think they're all excellent. I'm picking winners. And I like this guy more, so I'm going to criticize the other guy and pretend my guy didn't make mistakes so I can criticize this guy so my guy can be – which is just, it's silly.
The irony of it, Bryan, this is the funny thing about it. They will talk about a guy that has taken 2.5 years to 3 years for the light to finally go off and compare him to a kid who's literally just played his first season to say, this is what you need to do.
And it's also not true. That guy made more mistakes. That's where I say some of this stuff is just silly agenda-driven stuff. But at the end of the day, the reality is all these kids can play. And the great thing about the room is if you're Drake Bowen, you can't get in your feels about how good you think you are. I'm the leader of this team. And you still have to go out and work and earn it. Because if you don't, Kingston and Preston Zinner and Bodie Cahoon are right there waiting on you to slip up. If you're Jaden Osbury, if you're Jalen Steed, and you're like, hey, the light's gone on, I'm ready to roll, you better stay hungry, brother, because you got Jaden Osbury. And here's the thing about Kingston, any linebacker position, you got to be worried about 27 because he can play all of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I still think there's going to come a day when 34 and 27 are the starting linebackers together. And we even saw that last year when they were on the field together. But the point, you can't take a day off or have a practice off or feel I'm good or, you know what, it's the middle of July or middle of June. I'm home. Nobody's really holding me accountable. It's hot outside. I don't want to go work today. You know what's going to happen? You may think that, but here's what's going to happen. That other guy or those, in this case, those 5 other guys, they are working today. And you're going to find yourself passed up. And I think that's where depth is so important. And this is what Pete Carroll did at USC. That you want to know why they competed the way they did? Number one, that competition prepared you for Saturdays were always easier than Monday to Friday. Yep. And that's kind of what preparation needs to be. But the other part about it was we're going to compete because I want you to understand that if you don't want to compete today, I got somebody behind you that can. But here's the reality of it, Shaun. You and I have talked about this in the past. There was a long time in Notre Dame's history where certain guys could get away with not giving it everything they got. Because look, dude, you're going to bench me for him? No, you're not. So I'm going to do what I'm going to do because there is no account of. Now, I don't know that there's really a position on the team where I'm going to say that about. Even Leonard Moore. Okay, you want to go eat burgers and Cheetos this summer and not work out, and then you're going to get passed up. Now, we know Leonard Moore's not going to do that. That's why I'm using him as an example. You know, Drake Bowen's not going to do that. But the point is, you have to be that way at linebacker because there's so much talent behind you that, I mean, look, honestly, guys, if we're going into the season and Notre Dame's linebacker room was Preston Zinner, Bodie Cahoon, Madden Faramo, Anthony Sacca, Teddy Rizak, and let's just say Jaden Osbury, we'd be kind of excited about this room. But I just left off 3 of the 4 quote-unquote top guys. That speaks to the depth of this team. So if you are one of those top 4 guys, you better stay hungry especially when people aren't watching. I think that's what makes me so excited about the secondary. That's what makes me so excited about the linebacker room. And that's what makes me so excited about the D-line when we get to that, guys, is the depth of talent. You're seeing the fruits of Marcus Freeman's recruiting now because, we had a great linebacker class last year. I got Kingston. I got this guy. I got that guy. But I got Bodie. But I'm not resting on those laurels. I'm going to go out and I'm going to get Madden Faramo. I'm going to get Anthony Sacca. I'm going to get Josiah Kia. And that came after a year where they got Drake Bowen and they got Jaden Osbury. And that came after a year that they got Josh Burnham and got Jalen Sneed and got Junior Tuilamaka. And they just that has created a room where, A, you've got so many weapons. You don't have to have your middle linebacker play 900 snaps. And you can throw different skill sets on the table. I mean, there's team times next year where I won't be shocked if you see, is that Jaden Osbury and Jalen Sneed on the field together? Oh, that's interesting. It makes sense because of what you're about to face. You have all these different types of combinations. And I'll say that was the biggest surprise for me, guys, is how comfortable all the combinations were together. There was never that identifying combination like, these 2 guys are on the field together.
Yeah.
This could be a problem.
Depth is the biggest differentiator for me for coming into this season. There's a lot of people that talk about Madden Faramo, rightfully so. And I think I was watching, I think it was IB Nation Sports Talk, and Vince and Shaun were talking about Madden. And there's a lot of questions about, I think a lot of people just assume that since Kingston played a lot as a freshman, now Madden Faramo is going to be Kingston 2.0. But where I have a lot of confidence going into this year is, to all of your guys' points about depth, They needed Kingston to do that last year because of the uncertainties at linebacker. Now we know what these guys can go do on the field on Saturday. You know what I mean? Because going into last season, you didn't know. People had a good idea. And obviously we're talking about Drake Bowen, a kid who has a high ceiling. But at the end of the day, until he gets on the field, you didn't know what he was going to do on the field. Kingston had to be ready. You didn't know what Jaden Ausberry was going to do once he started rotating in and getting meaningful minutes. Kingston had to be ready. You didn't know if Jalen Sneed was going to take that next step in his evolution as a pure linebacker, not just as a pass rusher. Now you look at this season and you know what all three of those guys can do. And Kingston played over 300 snaps and probably would have been over 400 if he wasn't hurt for the USC and IU game. And so all of those reasons, man, the depth of the room, it's got to leave you excited, because they're the room that I can confidently say at the absolute bare minimum, and I'm talking absolute bare minimum, they will be as good as they were last year. And we are all under the assumption, rightfully so, that they are going to be much better, much more improved from an already really good unit last season.
Last thing I'm going to say, I feel a little bit about the linebacker room like I did about the running back room last year. You guys remember last summer, I said, look, I know they've got a lot to prove, but I don't know that there's a running back room that I would trade for these guys. I know that they're not as proven as this group and that group. And last year was Penn State and Ohio State. That was the group. And Penn State and Ohio State's groups did not disappoint. They were both outstanding, but Notre Dame's was every bit as good. And that's how I feel about the linebacker room right now is there's not a linebacker room I'd trade. Now, are there some individual linebackers, like if he wanted to come to Notre Dame, I won't know if I'd say no, but like, it's like if you're at the point now where it's like, I have confidence in the coaching. I have confidence in the leadership. I have confidence in the talent. I have confidence in the depth that this room has a chance to be outstanding. And when you see a more mature Jalen Sneed, when you see a more physically developed Jaden Ausberry, and a more experienced Drake Bowen and Kingston Vilama-Asa, along with the younger players that are continuing to merge, I don't know how you're not fired up about this group as a whole. And we can pick and choose. I like this guy. I don't care. I want them all to play. I don't want any of them to dominate the reps. I could see Drake maybe playing a little bit more of the Mike snaps this year than last year, perhaps. But I'd be okay if they don't, just because I love the idea of these guys being fresh in the fourth quarter of every game and fresh in November and then obviously fresh in the playoffs. And because if they can be a split second faster because they have 150, 200 less reps on their bodies than what maybe the team they're playing against, that's how you win some of these games in the fourth quarter. Like Penn State had more their starters had to play more reps during the season than Notre Dame's guys did. And you started to see them fade in the second half on both sides of the ball, especially on defense. And I think the depth factored into that. And as you guys said, I think this group's got a chance to be a really dominant group.
Well, listen, we got one more group that we got to talk about here on defense.
For the strength part, right?
Yep, for the strength part. And that is the defensive tackles. Now, this one for me, I don't know about you guys, and I'll kind of give my piece here and then hand it off. This was a tougher group for me to evaluate in comparison to the secondary and the linebacker group. And Bryan, you and I talked about this when we started planning for this show. And the production from the group, from the defensive tackles as a whole, I would say was relatively consistent and considered a strength in 2024, but you never knew who it was going to come from, especially early on. We talked about how Howard Cross and Riley Mills' performance was up and down, but Jason Onye was filling in, and there was a lot of people early in the season that said he was their best interior defensive lineman. But then Jason Onye steps away from the team. Then Riley Mills and Howard Cross pick it up around Louisville, Stanford, and they're off and running. But then Howard Cross gets hurt. But then Donovan Heinisch comes in and fills, and he is arguably more productive, ripped off 4 sacks in 2 games, between when he subbed in at Florida State and the Virginia game. And then unfortunately Riley Mills goes down. But then Gabriel Rubio steps up and has a pretty good game against Georgia. So I do believe that this was a strength of the team, but where some people, and I would agree with their sentiment, where the frustration lied is you kind of, outside of Riley Mills' stretch from really Louisville to the second half of IU.
He was dominant every week by that point in time. Yeah,
he was. But outside of that stretch, which was, as crazy as it to say, technically half of the season, you never really knew who it was going to be. You knew it was going to be somebody, but you just didn't know who it was going to be. So that's what makes this conversation interesting for me.
Yeah, and that's why I think we count as a strength, but also looking at it from the standpoint of, but it wasn't always a strength. Just like linebacker wasn't always a strength last season. It was more often than not. That's why they went 14-2 and played for the national championship.
Yeah.
But we're talking about this from a championship caliber standpoint. But I think, Shaun, when I look at it, what frustrated me about last year compared to the year before is the year before, there were stretches where Riley and Howard were both dominant. I don't know that we saw a lot of that this year. And like when you look at Howard, he had 22 pressures this year. 9 of them came in 2 games against Stanford, and I think it was Stanford and Louisville, I think is what it was. Let me go look at his numbers again. I think it was Stanford and Louisville. He had 9 pressures against Louisville and Stanford. And that was out of 22 on the season. He also had 6 run stops that game, which was almost a third of what he did all year. He had 19 run stops. That was the frustration with Howard last year, was we would see spurts of it, but we just didn't see it very consistently. Fortunately, they had enough depth where Donovan Heinisch stepped up and filled that void when he wasn't playing well. And then part of it for Howard, too, is by the time you got to the Florida State game, he was never healthy again. He had to battle through an injury. I mean, you probably would have liked to have sat him out if you had, for a couple games, just let him rest and get that knee healthy. You just couldn't afford to do that because of you already were out with Onye. You didn't, you had all these other issues. And then, of course, when Riley went out, he had to play even more. So I at the end of the year, Shaun, I want to know if you agree with this, but I do feel like on the whole, the defensive tackle position was a strength. But this is the one strength area that I also think you could argue needs to be in the they got to get a lot better category because of the lack of consistency, where at times it was just kind of Riley was carrying the group. And early in September, it was kind of Onye carrying the group at times. And then, there's a couple games where Howard busted out and played great, and they played great together. But that's the part where I think with this D tackle room, consistency, I would sacrifice some of the big-time playmaking for more consistency from this position, and it's the only position that I would make that case for.
In football, you always want a dude, right? If it's wide receiver, you would love a dude in that room. You want a dude at quarterback. You want a dude at left tackle. You want a dude wherever you go in any position room. And so I don't know if we necessarily have now. I absolutely love what you guys reported coming out of that scrimmage with Jason Onye. And Bryan, I actually talked to Malik about this. I want to get your historic standpoint. Notre Dame and young men feeling like this is their last shot at Notre Dame historically has worked out very well for Notre Dame. Like guys that haven't quite played up to or just never got it, and then they come into that last season with everybody doubting them or maybe had forgotten about them. Remember the year Asmar Bilal, we were like, man, Asmar Bilal he might not even start. And this kid comes out and just exceeds everything. Notre Dame just puts that.
I thought they were in trouble in 2019 when I realized he was a starting will linebacker. I did.
Absolutely.
I'll admit it. I did.
Absolutely. And the kid came out and played really well. You talk about Jordan Patello was in that position last year. He came out at the beginning of the year.
We wouldn't even talk about him in the offseason, Shaun, because I don't even care he's in show me mode now. I don't even want to talk about him. Because I don't have a clue what he's going to do. He's in show me mode.
Yeah. So that trend and knowing what Jason Onye went through and knowing like, okay, this is my last shot. This is Notre Dame. Like something clicks for those guys. And they usually take off and have really good seasons. So if he can become a guy, and once again, I think they have really good versatility along that defensive interior in comparison to and more depth than they had last year. I know your guy, Trev, you've been waiting all year, like the last year even. Where's Armel Mukam? When is he coming? When is he going to get shot? Bryan, you've been worried about, what's going on with Brennan Vernon? Like, we got to coach him up. We got to get him ready. And you're talking about a couple of plays that he made, right? And so when you start to hear all of these things coming together, you talk about having a dude, maybe Jason Onye, since he was being that dude early last year, maybe he becomes that consistent dude on the interior. Maybe one of the transfers can go ahead and be like a 1A, 1B. But in the whole, on the interior, I feel really good when I have great rotation, when I can just come at you in waves on the interior, right? And we're going to get to another position where you just want to come at people in waves. But I just think Notre Dame is more equipped to be able to really improve in the run game, but then go to different combinations and pass rushing situations instead of having to solely rely on, okay, these are our top two guys. I really think Al Washington can mix and match depending upon the team, depending upon the situation to get the best out of that group. And like you said, there's a reason Devin Houston is like, yo, I think I might want to go to the offensive side of the ball because I don't see a path this year or next year. So let me go ahead and make this move. You have to feel absolutely fantastic. We're not even talking about what if Sean Sevillano makes a jump? What if he starts to flash, right? Because you just need him to flash. What is flashing for him? Those numbers are not like, you're not expecting him to put up 6-7 sacks as a defensive tackle. But heck, if he's like plugging a hole, allowing your linebacks to field and flow, and then he gets about 3 to 4 tackles for loss. All right. For his reps, what is he doing for the percentage of reps that he gets? Is he making an impact the vast majority of the time that he's in there? I just really believe that the interior of this defensive line is probably going to have more impact on everybody else. Because I think everybody else, we know how good they are. But they can help the entire defense go to an entirely different level. If they are from 1 through 8 or 1 through 7, if they're impactful in their own way, because like you said, they're not all cookie cutters. And another thing, I think they only have one guy under 300. Is it Donovan? The only guy that's like
Elijah Hughes is like 290.
290. Okay.
Yeah.
But that we haven't had a defensive line room on the interior like that.
He'd have been your second biggest player in the rotation last year, by the way.
Absolutely. That's, it hasn't been like that in Notre Dame in a long time.
Oh, yeah.
A long time. So, needless to say, when this team gets off the bus, it's looking a whole lot different than say the team getting off the bus 5, 6, 7 years ago. So, I'm excited. I'm excited about this defensive line. To hear Chris Ash talk about them when he first met with the media as the group that really has stood out on the defensive side of the ball, that was like, oh, really? Because I expected to hear linebacker. I expected to hear defensive backs. He's like, man, the defensive line has really surprised me. And like you said, Bryan, he's probably looking at the film from last year, and he's seeing the inconsistencies. Mm-hmm. He's seeing guys show up and then not show up, and then the next guy. And he only had one guy, Riley Mills, who's no longer here, that really became dominant and brought it each and every week. So it probably was a bit of a surprise for him during the spring. But it's a pleasant surprise. It really is. It's a pleasant surprise.
Trev, I think the thing for me is I just need to see more consistency from the veterans. And I think Sean's point about, look at historically, but like, is that where Gabriel Rubio and Jason Onye are going to be this year? Like, are they that guy that says, this is my last shot at this? And I mean, Gabriel Rubio, that kid loves Notre Dame. I mean, he committed, I think it was I think it might've been the first commitment in his class. Kid loves Notre Dame. You don't think he cares about his legacy at Notre Dame? You don't think Jason Onye, for everything he's battled through to get back to Notre Dame, doesn't really care about leaving his impact on this football team? Those two kids are also very close because they came into Notre Dame together. They were in the same class together. They're super key. And I mean, I love what I've seen in the spring from both of them. I love what I've seen from both of them in the spring. But now it's just got to carry over into the fall. That's going to be the big thing, guys, is they just needs to carry over in the fall. Jared Dawson, how's he going to react to the town in the room? Does he look at it as like, hey, I got to raise my level of play so I can be part of this? Or does he, got to see it. We haven't seen it this spring. Just when I say haven't seen it, I mean just lack of opportunity. Just haven't seen a lot from him this spring. How does he react to it? Donovan Heinisch, we know who Donovan Heinisch is, right? I mean, Armo Mukum raising his level of play. Elijah Hughes is a good, steady, good rotation guy. And as you mentioned, what if Sevillano can step up and give you those 330 pounds of run-stopping beef in certain situations? So I think the tools are there, guys, for the defensive tackle position to be a strength again. I just think it's going to look different. I don't know if we'll see as much of the pass rushing prowess of the group in the past. I think Onye can give you some of that. Donovan can certainly give you that in pass rushing situations, but I mean like that first and second down where when Howard and Riley were just kind of both on, it was hard to throw a football against Notre Dame because you just like in Caleb. I mean, I think the most on they've ever been together in a game was probably USC 2023, and I don't know that Caleb Williams ever sat in a pocket and threw a comfortable pass that entire game. And a big part of that was the two guys up the middle. I don't know that we'll have as much of that, but where the potential is that they will provide more beef and consistency against the run. And I'm willing to sacrifice that for reasons that we'll get into here in a little bit, but that's going to be the big thing for me, guys, is I just need to see this group be more consistent. And if they're able to be more consistent, then I think we're going to have a chance to see better overall play from the defensive tackle room, even if it won't be as flashy. I don't expect it to be as flashy because there's only really one guy that I see as being a flashy type of dominant player, and that's Jason Onye. Jared Dawson can be a very effective pass rusher. He has been at Louisville the last couple of years, but it's a different type of thing. But even if you want to throw him in there, maybe he could be that kind of guy. He's never played the volume of snaps that those other two guys have played. But the point is, guys, I just think there's more potential for consistency from this group, and I think that's exactly what we need from them, is to be more stout against the run, to be more gap conscious against the just overall as players. And I think we saw them kind of lose that a little bit because they were allowed to win last year, and that made them effective pass rushers, but I think it made them very vulnerable against the run. I've never seen a defense as good as Notre Dame's give up as many third down, first down runs as what Notre Dame gave up last year. Why? Because they were willing to give that up in order to rush the quarterback. To be as good as Notre Dame was against the pass, I think they sacrificed a little bit against the run. And Al Golden, not immensely, but it was there. But I also think it was kind of smart for Al Golden to be that way because when you have an undersized athletic D-line, don't ask them to be stout run stoppers. So I don't even blame Al Golden for that. I think he was playing to the strengths of his players in doing that. But now your strengths, I believe, are a little different because Rubio is now a prime player. Because remember, guys, a year ago, Gabriel Rubio wasn't with the team. And I believe the spring before that, he was injured. So we're now seeing a healthy Gabriel Rubio. Hopefully he can stay that way. He hasn't been fully healthy in a while. He's got to stay that way, but he brings a completely different element to the table than what Riley Mills and Howard Cross did. Not better, not worse, just different. Jason Onye brings a different element to the table than Howard Cross did. And Jason Onye is more playing nose and three technique right now. Jared Dawson is kind of a lot like Howard Cross, but he's about 20 pounds heavier than Howard Cross was. So it's a different group now, guys, than it has been in the past. And how does Chris Ash adjust to the difference in who those players are? So I want to make sure my comment, Shaun, is not taken as like a criticism of Al Golden's scheme, because I view Al Golden as doing that because that's just what he kind of needed to do to maximize the potential of his room. But I think that you can go a different way now because of you have a different type of skill set at that position.
Yeah, you guys know this about me by now at this point, and I'm very much a show me person. On paper, the D-line is going to perform at a much more consistent level. They've gotten bigger. They might not have that top-end potential star power that Riley Mills brought to the table, Howard Cross at times in 2024. But as a group, I think there's going to be less fall off of when there's to me, there was a noticeable difference when, hey, we got Riley Mills and Howard Cross out there, and they're kind of on today. And then when they would need a breather because they're not in the game, there was a difference in production. And I don't see it being like that this season. I view this room very similar to how I view the wide receiver room. On paper, all signs are pointing to the direction of, this group is going to take that next step. What does that next step look like for the defensive tackle room? I'm not saying they're going to get a Riley Mills for 14, 15, 16 games. But I think they're going to get consistent level of play for the duration of the season. And that's something that I want to see. When I fast forward and I start thinking about, Bryan, when you and I do the Thursday pregame show and what are the keys to victory, how many times did you and I sit down and really, when we talked about the defense, wasn't like a whole crazy a lot of substance. Offense, we're breaking down. We got to see this and use this motion and get this guy involved. Defense is kind of like, all right, well, you have Xavier Watts and Leonard Moore is pretty cool, so let's go to work. But the one thing that we would always say is someone along the defensive line has to step up. I want that to be more of a constant in the conversations that you and I are having, or in the postgame, all three of us are having with Vince afterwards, like, another game where Gabe Rubio just wouldn't let anybody pass the line of scrimmage in the run game. Another game where Jason Onye just had 3 batted balls in the third quarter and they just couldn't get anything going in the middle 8. And that's the things that I want to see out of this unit. And on paper, all the promise in the world from the things that we have seen in practice, I think you have to look at that with a little bit of a caveat, not too much the interior. That's kind of more so the group that we're getting ready to talk about. But seeing it in games and on Saturdays, I believe that they're going to take that next step, man, and I'm excited to watch it unfold. Any more thoughts on the D-line, fellas? Go ahead, Shaun.
And what's interesting is I heard both of you guys sitting there talking. Let's really put this and crystallize it and contextualize it. We're looking for these improvements. We're looking for this consistency. This defensive line suffered just about every bad thing it could suffer last season. Man. Everything imaginable. Other than maybe the offensive line was a little bit worse, starting from like the fall. I'm just thinking about losing Jagasaw, being young, not having veterans.
Tell you why it wasn't worse. Because literally the entire 2 deep at defensive tackle missed games.
Gosh.
The entire 2 deep. Because Donovan Heinisch wasn't going to be kneeling in the 2 deep until Rubio was out. Heinisch is the only, think about it, your 275-pound D tackle is the only guy that didn't miss a game with an injury last year, I believe. I believe he played all 16, didn't he? I'm going to go look because now I'm like second guessing myself. Like, did he actually play all 16 last year? But think, and I'm talking like significant portions of the season, not just like a game. Yeah, he played all the games last year. Like, think about that, guys. So Shaun, to your point, where the offensive line lost 3 starters, one of them, happened during this camp, but like they still had 2 other guys that started the whole year, basically. But the other thing, too, is you were replacing those injured guys with guys who started the year before. That wasn't necessarily the case this year. So that's why I think it was even worse.
Well, that just goes to, like, they were still good enough to get you to the national championship game. And that isn't, yes, we can sit here and talk about what we need to see and the improvements we need to see and the consistency. Well, that consistency was impacted by injury. Like, that's honestly, it was impacted by injury. And so are they better suited to be able to deal with injuries this year than they were last year, with Bryce Young and Logan Thomas being or getting better, and the additions? That is something. Or flat out, let's just speak that they won't have the same injury late in the season that they had in 2024. But either way, I just wanted to kind of think about, because I thought about it, like, we got to the national championship game. Like, you could tell they were out of gas a little bit in the national championship game, but they did a pretty good, considering they did a pretty good job, especially with the best guy they had on crutches on the sideline after the Indiana game.
Yeah. I mean, you dominated Georgia without Riley Mills and with Howard Cross playing 75%.
75% at best, yeah.
And no Jason Onye.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the D tackle still. You beat Penn State without Riley Mills and Howard Cross at 75% and no Jason Onye. And yeah, you wore out against Ohio State, the best team. Okay, it's going to happen. You got to hope that they can stay healthier, but that's also, I think, a big reason why, even with Onye coming back, hopefully, again, it was hopefully he was going to come back, with Rubio coming back, with Donovan Heinrich coming back, with Sevillano, with Armel Mukum, with Brendan Vernon, with Devin Houston at the time. That's why they still went out in the portal and said, we got to go get more guys because we can't assume our depth is going to be fine this season. So, and they were all different types of injuries, and not all of them were injuries, because that's the other thing is Jason Onye wasn't injured last year. So you can't put that on the strength program. He wasn't injured last year. It was a completely different situation. And so they were all different types of injuries. And like Howard Cross has just got rolled up on. He came into the season he came into fall camp with a hamstring, which meant he did something during the summer workouts. And then he gets hurt against Florida State, gets rolled up on. Riley Mills just had one of those knee just got caught type of things. And a lot of that stuff was just, fluky at D tackle. D end, a little different story, but if this unit can, it's simple. If they can play to their potential and just stay remotely healthy, you're going to lose somebody, but you're much better prepared to handle that this year than you were last year. I think the fact that I don't anticipate them relying on a guy as much as they had to rely on Riley Mills last year puts them in a better position to overcome any potential injury. But you just hope it's not another year like that, where they got to deal with literally their entire two deep going down. And that's obviously an ideal situation. We're going to talk about DNs next, guys, because it's all part of what we're going to, this is the one group, Trev, we talk about strengths, and this is the one group that I look at and say, this is the one position more than any other that has to get better than what it was last year. This is the group, Shaun, that I think was even more negatively impacted by injuries than the interior. And because like at least with the tackle, you had Riley until the playoffs. Boubacar Traore was like starting to look like a future first-round draft pick in a couple games before he got hurt. And then, of course, that meant Josh Burnham had to move back to Viper, a position he had spent all offseason not like outgrowing. They wanted him to play end. You had to rely on a true freshman. Your transfer, RJ Oben, wasn't the guy you hoped he would be. Like this group was the most, in my opinion, on defense, kind of snake-bitten a little bit. Early on, I was very impressed with the play of the defensive ends. I mean, Jordan Patojo and Boubacar were two of the better players, and Josh Burnham, I should say, were some of the better players they had against Northern Illinois. It's the interior guys that played poorly against Northern Illinois. The edge players did some things. Boubacar still a work in progress as a run defender, but he was on the verge as a pass rusher of just being a big-time player. Jordan Patel was playing the best football of his career and then goes down to game 3. But they scrapped, they clawed, they fought. Huge shout out to Al Washington for the job he did to keep moving those pieces around and get the production that they did. And, Junior Telemaka doesn't play a single defensive snap the first 2 games, and he steps in and first game, he's really a big factor in the rotation going in. He has a huge interception, where against Miami of Ohio, and just, you love what that group did, but they just have to, if this team's going to compete for a championship again, this group has to be better. And that's the one group right now coming out of the spring. We still don't know how much better it's going to be. I'm encouraged by what we saw from guys, but at the end of the day, guys, the problem with the defensive end position is it's hard to really evaluate how much improvement they've made because we're watching them go against freshmen and walk-ons. Bryce Young should be dominating Max Anderson. And Max Anderson, as I've said before, I love that kid as a walk-on. Like, that was a really good walk-on pickup. His high school teammate, Robbie Wallen, who's out this spring, that's the kind of walk-ons you need more of in your program because they're good football players. But a kid like that's not who I think is probably needs to be more of an interior guy who's also played some center. He started fall camp or spring practice off at center. Then they had to move him to left tackle, and you're asking him to block Bryce Young. It's unfair, but it's also hard to really evaluate Bryce in that regard. We didn't see Logan Thomas in the scrimmage. Jordan Patelho's still out. We don't know what he's going to be. Boubacar Traore, all the talent in the world. How healthy is he going to be? Where's his endurance at? Where's his strength at? Josh Burnham and Jr. did their thing, but that's still the position guys on defense that is most sounding a lot like the offense, where I don't know how good they're going to be because this guy didn't practice, this guy didn't practice, and this guy was going against somebody that, of course he's going to beat that guy. And this is still the biggest question mark that I think they have on defense by far, just because of availability this spring and because there is a less proven, like the D tackle and edge both don't have a ton of proven playmaking ability for stretches, but I think it's needed more from this group than it is at D tackle. D tackle, just do your job, just plug holes, let the linebackers run to the ball. I mean, we just talked about these stud safeties and linebackers Notre Dame had. Just stay on blocks and let those guys run to the ball, and you're fine. Defensive ends, you need them to be more playmakers. And there's all the potential in the world for this to be a great unit. And we've talked this offseason about how the unit has a chance to be special. But when we're evaluating where it is right now, guys, it's really hard to know for sure how good this group is going to be in the fall, just because we just haven't seen a lot from them this spring. Either A, they haven't been challenged in the practices we saw, or B, we're still not seeing certain guys.
Well, what we can say. Oh, go ahead, Trev.
No, you're. The only thing that I'll add here, man, is this is the one group on defense that I can say needs to take a sizable step forward in both aspects of the game, against the run and in the pass rush. Pass rush, I think we can all agree that this team has to be better. But we saw what it looks like when the D-line isn't good at setting the edge. We saw that against Penn State. They made some adjustments, and the run defense was significantly improved in the second half. That's something that needs to be a little bit more consistent again next season. But when I look at the defensive ends, yes, every position group needs things that they have to work on. Secondary has things that they have to work on. Linebackers have things they have to work on. D tackles do as well. But the DN position is the one that I can confidently say in both phases of the game need to take a more sizable step forward in comparison to the other groups that we've talked about so far today. And that, to me, on top of the availability that we'll be seeing and the level of competition that they're going up against in practice, it just leaves it as an unknown. I'm not saying that they haven't taken that step forward, and I'm not saying that they can't take that step forward. We just don't know what that looks like. We kind of have to look in between the lines a little bit and just assume that it's like, hey, look, Bryce Young's going into year 2. Odds are he's going to be a better player than what he was.
Looks like $1 million in practice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, is like he was dominant, guys. We're not saying he wasn't. It's just it's hard to get too fired up about it when you consider who he's going against. Mm-hmm. And there are still some technical things he's still working through and getting better at, but good Lord, you can't teach 6'7", 260 in athletic. You can't. No. You can't. And, but man, that's the thing that it's hard not to get excited about this group though, Trev, because we do know what Boubacar can do when healthy. We started to see Patelho figured out. We know what Bryce can do. And he was a much better player later in the year than he was earlier in the year.
Oh yeah.
And we know what Josh Burnham can do. We know what Junior can do. I mean, everybody talks about Boubacar and Patelho and Bryce Young. Who's the guy that made the big stop against Penn State early in the game that when they're about to score a touchdown, it's 2nd and goal at the 1? And who's the guy that makes the big tackle for loss that puts him in that throwing situation and the guy drops the ball and they have to settle for a field goal? It's Josh Burnham. Who's the guy that made the huge early sack for Notre Dame against Georgia? It was Junior. Who's the guy that recovered the fumble that Adon Schuler knocked out? Or would he recover the one that he recovered the one that RJ Oben knocked out? Yep. It was Junior. Who had the hustle backside interception of the Christian Gray breakup against Miami of Ohio when I believe they were knocking on the door getting ready to score? It was Junior Tuilamaka. And we don't talk about those guys because they're not the flashy, sexy, high upside potential first-round picks. But there's been a lot of years where if that's your starting defensive end group, you're like, that's pretty solid. That's pretty solid. And that's where the excitement, and I haven't talked about Logan Thomas, who legitimately is a 4-5 type of athlete. He's got to put on some weight. And we haven't talked about how Chris Burgess is going to show up in the summer too. I mean, it's hard to not get excited about it, guys, but we're also trying to look at it and say, let's look at it and say, but we've got to pump the brakes a little bit because of the unknowns related to injury and how much they were challenged or not challenged this spring because of how many people were out.
See, for me, if someone's going to be great and we believe that Bryce Young has a really good shot of being a great college football player, those guys take practice very seriously. Doesn't matter who they're going up against. Doesn't matter if it's Emil Wagner, Charles Jaggersaw, doesn't matter who it is. They want to slay you. And so he's at a point where that's what I want to see from him. If I'm seeing that effort, that's what encourages me. That makes me believe that regardless of who's in front of him, he's locked in to becoming who he wants to be. And so the question I really want to get into, injuries with Botelho, Boubacar Traore, how much do you think guys like Jalen Sneed and Kingston Villamulasa are going to be used early in the season in pass rushing situations in different packages to kind of supplement that pass rush?
A lot.
You think a lot?
Yeah, because even if Boubacar is able to play early, Shaun, I don't know that he's going to be able to play as much. I think you're probably going to need to have him on a little bit of a pitch count. So the question then is, do you want him to be used more on first and second down? Are we getting more of that first and second down pass rush? Or are we more talking about, do you want to use him in that nickel situation? And if that's the case, then you'll see less of, those guys needing to do that, or they'll be playing alongside with him. I think that's going to be the question. Then it's also, okay, are we talking 3rd and 4? Or are we talking 3rd and 9? One of the things that I kind of always got concerned about against the better teams in the schedule is Notre Dame would put an entire 3rd down package on the field no matter what the 3rd down situation was. You know what I mean? It's like 3rd and 3, put the nickel team in there. It's like, we might want to leave the base defense in there for this one. But I mean, those are things that you've got to, you've got to kind of look at and say, hey, listen, this is a situation where I don't know what the preference is going to be for Boubacar. I think it's more so getting him first and second down reps and then maybe some 3rd and long situations, but they may go a different direction. And I think that's going to impact how much Kingston and Jalen Sneed are used in that package. And look, there's an argument to be made that it'd be even better for Jalen Sneed to not be a pass rusher on 3rd down if he is playing more sound, disciplined football, because he's so fast. He's a great coverage asset, flying to the football, getting running backs out of the backfield. I mean, I'm not trying to throw a wheel route against Jalen Sneed that he knows is coming. You know what I mean? And so if you can use Boubacar and Logan Thomas and Bryce Young and Josh Burnham and Kingston in some of those situations, because I think Kingston's the one linebacker that I think I most want to have rushing off the edge on 3rd down, because he's the most natural at it. Where Jalen's really athletic and explosive, but he's also 10 pounds, 5'10". I mean, look, he's 230 something now, but he's probably going to be down to 225 by the time next season starts, just kind of how it goes. But I just look at it and say, I just want to see Kingston rush the quarterback and then the D lineman rush the quarterback, ideally, if Jalen Sneed has truly kind of the light gone on from an assignment correctness standpoint, because I think he can be a tremendous second-level asset. But you've got so many of those type of weapons, Shaun, of Boubacar and Botelho and Logan Thomas and Bryce Young and Kingston that I would throw in there. Jason Onye is serving the Riley Mills role on 3rd down as the big body up the middle potentially. Jared Dawson's a really good pass rusher up the middle. I mean, there's a lot more potential things you can do where you don't maybe need Jalen Sneed as much next year to rush the passer, and you can now use him as a coverage weapon, as a screen game weapon. Hey, you want to try to throw a perimeter screen against us? Not when number 3's out there. I mean, I think those were things where the more pass rushers step up, the less you need to use Jalen in that role, the more you can use him now as a second-level weapon. And that's something I wouldn't be upset about. if we see that emerge, and then that could have an impact on how you're using Boubacar, to your original question, Shaun. I think the big thing is I'll be shocked if Boubacar and Jordan Botelho are 100% full strength, full go, full reps on the first week of the season. I think they're going to both be on a pitch count. And that's okay when you consider how much depth they have at the position. You can get away with that. And honestly, it's like, look, I'm not going to wear those guys down early because I need to make sure they're healthy for the end of the season. Because I do have Josh Burnham and Junior Tuilamaka and Bryce Young and Logan Thomas and third down situations, Kingston and Jalen Sneed and potentially a Matt Faramo, potentially a Preston Zinner. As there's so many options now, that raises the bar, or I should say maybe makes the margin for error a little bit wider than it has been in the past. But ideally, this unit's going to be defined by a couple things. Bryce Young getting closer to his full potential and Boubacar Traore getting back to full strength. If those two things happen, I know what Josh Burnham's going to give me. He's a darn good football player. He's going to do a lot of the dirty work. He's going to constantly be underrated by fans because he does the non-sexy stuff that you super need. Junior's going to be that way. And Botelho's going to be that way. And then let Boubacar and Bryce be the flashy, big sack number guys. Let Logan Thomas be that. And you've got yourself one heck of a D-line rotation. And, oh, by the way, 3 years ago, it's a no-brainer that Chris Burgess is going to play as a freshman. No-brainer. 2 years ago, it's probably a no-brainer that Chris Burgess plays as a freshman. Now he's got a lot to prove. Cole Mullins has a lot to prove. These are good football players that are now battling just to sniff the field. So I love the potential. I love the upside. I just don't know that we're going to see that week one in Miami from the guys that are currently out. And that's where I still say this unit is still a bit of a question mark for me when I look at what this team can be or what this unit can be. And I'll say this, and I want to get your guys' opinion. I want to hear from you first, Trev, and then from you, Shaun. I'm going to say this. You guys, I'm going to do my own buy, sell, hold. Last time I did that was when I was on a vacation. I'm going to do it again now. Buy, sell, or hold this statement by yours truly. The defensive end position, the level to which the defensive end position improves will determine whether Notre Dame is or is not a national championship contender in 2025. Meaning, if they are just kind of what they were last year, this is still a team that's going to have to overcome not being as good as their opponent in the title game to win it. If this unit gets closer and closer and closer, the closer this unit gets to their full potential, the closer they have the type of dominant edge rushers that I think you need to truly win a championship. So that's why I say we love what the D tackles can do. The linebackers is secondary. It's how good this unit is that truly determines if Notre Dame has a really, really good defense or the nation's best defense that can truly say we can win a championship based on what we do, kind of like what Georgia did in 2021. That's my proposition. Are you buying it? Are you selling it? Or are you going to punk out and give me a hold?
Hold. No, so
well played, sir. Well played.
Thank you. So this is a buy for me for a couple of different reasons. One, we saw what that looked like last year. At some point, whether it's in the postseason, it could be in the national championship game, could be in the semifinals, could be in the quarterfinals this year. Notre Dame is going to come across a team where the secondary just won't be enough to stop. And we saw that against Ohio State. I'm not saying they played poorly, but they needed more supporting assets to help out their secondary. Shaun, you talked about this a lot in post-game shows. Sometimes your secondary is only as good as the pass rush allows it to be. And in the national championship game, all three of us, and I can guarantee everybody in the chat right now, all 292 people listening to the show, can agree Will Howard had time to set up camp and cook everybody a meal before somebody was sniffing him. And on the rare occasions that he was getting pressured, he was less accurate. At the end of the game, he just made a heck of a throw. He did get pressured on that 3rd and 11. He just made a heck of a throw. And honestly, it's because he had 3.5 quarters to get into a rhythm. You know, like there's times where players get dialed and they just can't miss. Notre Dame needs to find a way to get home with their front four pressure, especially on the edge, because that takes your linebackers away. Some of to what we talked about for the linebackers, and they were just kind of, Al Golden used them as blitzing in the run and blitzing in the pass. specifically in the pass game, it's because there was inconsistencies getting home with your front four. The edge needs to find a way to be more of an integral part of that pass rush, or else we're going to see a lot of the similar things where we're just like, yeah, I mean, the secondary is great. There's only so much you can ask them to do. The linebackers are great, but they're sending two of them every play or every third down because they have to find a way to get home, generate pressure somewhere. And so, yeah, I'm buying this one because we have, one, seen what a Notre Dame defense looks like without the DNs consistently generating pressure. And two, I think it frees up more players on the defense. It does. It speeds up a quarterback's internal clock, and it lets that high-end, lengthy, rangy, fast secondary go to work on balls that probably aren't going to be as accurate if they had time to set up and throw. So, yeah, definite buy for me.
Let me get some clarity before I punk out.
Don't do it, Shaun. Don't do it.
Before I punk out. Let me get some evidence that makes me feel good about punking out. No, are we saying as a total team, or are we just speaking defensively?
We're talking about defensively, meaning like the defense is it's like this, Shaun. The defensive ends were good enough last year for Notre Dame to get to the title game, but when you got to that game, there was a mismatch in the trenches that allowed Ohio State to outscore you. Now you're putting all that pressure on your offense that you got to now get into a shootout with Ohio State, and you ain't getting that done. Whereas in 2021, Georgia's D-line was such that you weren't going to win a shootout against them because they were going to dominate you. And so you go into a game against Ohio State, and you're in the situation where you're going to need some guys who maybe aren't Jack Sawyer, JT type of players, Abdul Carter type of players to play that way, which they did against Georgia. I mean, that's the thing, but it just you can't expect them to do that because they're not that kind of player. Whereas if they play to their potential, for example, look, I had Boubacar Traore as a 5-star upside player. He's my number one upside grade kid in the 2023 class. Now consider who was in that class: Drake Bowen, Jaden Ausbury, Armel Mukam, Christian Gray, Adon Schuler. He was my number one upside player in that class. Bryce Young was also a 5-star upside player in his class, and I believe my number one upside player in that class as well. So you're talking about guys, Shaun, that have elite game-changing potential, which they haven't had in the past, to the point where if they are playing to their potential, they can take over a game the way that Abdul Carter could as a unit, or the way that Ohio State's edge players could, the way that Georgia's D-line could in a different style, because they're different types of players than Georgia's guys, to where you're winning a title because it doesn't matter that your offense isn't as elite as it needs to be, because they can't score enough on you to beat you in a championship, where your 23 points in a title game get you the win because they're only scoring 13.
Gotcha.
That's what I'm referring to.
Gotcha.
So the closer, so part of the buy so hold, Shaun, is do you even believe they have that potential to be that kind of unit? And how, is reaching the potential the difference between them being a lot like they were last year, where when we got into the summer later the games, the defense was still really good, but it wasn't. You just aren't going to go out there and shut Penn State down for 4 quarters. You're not going to be able to go shut down Ohio State or even hold Ohio State down at all until they caught off the dogs, and then they tried to turn it back up. And as we've always said, you can't ramp it back up once you've turned it on. Once you've shut the car down in football, you're probably not turning it back on. It's just not how it works. And that's what I'm referring to, where it's like the quarterback, Will Howard's in his head like, oh, crap, I got to drop back on 3rd and 11 and get a throw off with these freaking guys coming at me. And so, you panic a little bit, and maybe you miss a throw where a guy might have been open. They haven't had that on the edge. And that's what the 2018 team had, Shaun. And that goes a lot to it, to where we felt that 2018 team, you could win a championship because of that unit. It's just the offense was so underwhelming in the postseason. But like think about how much they harassed Trevor Lawrence in the first half of that game. The reason they didn't harass him in the second half is because they had enough lead where they didn't have to throw it anymore. But Trevor Lawrence was running for his life in the first half of that game. I mean, Julian Aguara gets taken off the field on a 3rd down because he got injured the play before. They put Adetokunbo Ogundeji on the field, and he sacks Trevor Lawrence on the very next play and knocks him out of field goal range. That's the kind of unit that they had in 2018. They didn't have that type of unit last year. I mean, if you put the 2018 D-line with last year's linebackers and secondary, that title game might have looked a whole lot different. And that's what they didn't have last year, Shaun. And so that's where I'm coming from. It's like, I think the ends are the group whose emergence is the key to having that kind of defense, where it doesn't matter who we play. You better hope you get to, you better hope our offense doesn't get to 20, or it's a wrap for you.
You know what? Our resident Ohio State fan, Archer, probably would agree with this. And hearing you clarify that, I think JT and Jack Sawyer took a step forward as the ends for the Ohio State defense. So for that, clarifying that, I'll go ahead and buy it. I was going to sell it from a team standpoint, but you kind of mentioned why. When you face those type of teams, you're not shutting them down. Like, you're going to have to put up 28 to 30 points to win a game. It is what it is. So both sides of the ball have to be able to step up when the other side isn't playing as well as you expect it to play, right? And I think those opportunities were there. I think Notre Dame was more upset with the fact that we could have done this early on. We weren't being ourselves, even with the guys we had, even with the lack of pass rush. If we had played to our capabilities, we would have done a much better job of holding them probably in the 20s. And that's probably the way they feel as a defense. But what you're talking about is eliminating or increasing the margin of error for your team. If you do have that pass rush, now you don't have to play as perfect and you have room to play with, to whereas now you have impact plays that you can make that can turn games on a key third down. How many times did we watch them in the first half against Ohio State? Get them at 36, 37, and just couldn't get them off the field. Just about on every touchdown drive they had, Notre Dame had third down opportunities to end the drive and get the ball back. And like you said, Trevor, Will Howard could have just sat down with an easel and a canvas and painted in the pocket. I mean, he was that clean by the time he got to the second half. So I'll buy it. I'll definitely buy it from the standpoint of how you expressed it.
Also, Shaun, I would say that I do believe that you can get to the point as a defense where you can keep Ohio State in check. You can keep their points down into the 20s, and I point to, for example, Penn State the last 2 years. I mean, Ohio State beat Penn State 2 years in a row, scoring, I believe, 20 points in both games. Because why? Because they were able to really just harass Ohio State all game long in the trenches. I mean, Abdul Carter had 6 pressures against Ohio State this year. That was a big part of the reason that Ohio State just couldn't, there'd be guys open, but then they just would miss, because I think it gets in the quarterback's head about kind of who you are. We saw Adisa Isaac and the rest of the defense do that the year before. What made it harder for Ohio State to score on Michigan the last couple of years? It's the dominance from the defensive line. I mean, Ohio State had 21 Michigan had 21 pressures against Ohio State this past year. 21 pressures. They had 13 pressures the year before, but they had 7 hits on the quarterback.
Yeah.
And so it's just to me is like, if the only way, to your point, the only way you're going to have any shot at keeping a team like Ohio State down, a team like Oregon down, is not your secondary so good that they can hold Jeremiah Smith, the Emeka Egbuka, Cardinal Tate, Barron and Innis down. That's not happening unless you're just in their face the whole game with your pass rush. I think of Caleb Williams, I think of like 2 years ago. I mean, whatever you want to say about that USC team in 2023, they could score.
Yeah.
Not against Notre Dame. Why? Because they were just in his face all game. And that's my point is, I think that Notre Dame is starting to get there with the defensive end talent to where once it reaches its full potential, you have that type of end room. And that's the thing. Think about what Notre Dame's defensive end room is going to look like the day that Boubacar and Bryce Young both play to their full potential, and you have Logan Thomas, Josh Burnham, Chris Burgess, guys like that playing good football as well. And that's the kind of D end room that you have, where we've talked about this with JT at Ohio State. He will play 16 games last year, and I'd be willing to bet you that, you'd probably look at like 8 of those and you're like, he was all right. 9 and 10 of those, he was all right. But in the big games, that dude's always a dude. Right? I mean, he was that way against Notre Dame 2 years ago. You look at what Abdul Carter did against Ohio State. I mean, you could argue, and Notre Dame. I mean, just 8 Notre Dame's guys up. And that played a big role. Second half, Notre Dame found some answers protection-wise, and all of a sudden, they're going at them. And that's my point, is when you have that kind of elite edge ability, that's how you keep an offense like Ohio State's down enough to where you don't got to score 30 to win that game. And maybe there's times that happens, but by and large, it's not. That's why I say, like, you look at Georgia in 2021, you didn't need to score 30 points to win that game. You just needed to get to 20, and it was going to be a wrap. And that's what I'm referring to.
Let me ask you a question. Oh, go ahead.
Bryan,
it's different ways, but go ahead.
Yeah,
Trevor.
well, Bryan, to your point, when the biggest thing that I look at is the back-to-back games Ohio State had to finish their season.
Mm-hmm.
The Texas game and then what Notre Dame did against them. And everybody wants to, Texas played zone and they bracketed Jeremiah Smith. That's why they held him to low points. No, it's like, go back and look at the pressures. We talked about before the game that Notre Dame has to find a way to get after Will Howard and not let him be a facilitator of the offense. And they weren't able to do it. I mean, Texas, 15 pressures, 3 sacks, 3 hits on the quarterback, 9 hurries. Notre Dame had 8 total pressures that game. And then when you factor in that they basically stopped passing midway through the third quarter, you got to find a way to get and have a more effective offense. Ohio State scored in 5 consecutive drives. Got to find a way to get more pressure. And there's so many people that want to take away. See, this is why you don't play man. This is why you got to play zone. No, you got to find a way to get after the quarterback. Have to.
I mean, they got a true freshman down in Texas that they were bringing in. Colin Simmons was playing like he was shot out of a cannon in that game against Ohio State. I mean, he was scraping the shoulder pads of the quarterback multiple times. He had at least 2 or 3 almost sacks where he just forced the quarterback to escape and get to the outside. And you're right, man. But we saw it 2 different ways, because you pointed out Texas. That was primarily from the edge. You pointed out Penn State primarily from the edge. Michigan did a different way because Michigan was equipped to do it up the middle.
Texas's starting D tackles had 5 pressures in that game, though.
Well,
and then Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant just ate Ohio State.
Man,
right.
So it's different ways, right? So I in the perfect world, I would want the pressure to come from all 4 spots at any point in time, right? That going into that game, I would want to go into the national championship game where I can get 15 pressures. I can get 7 combined from the ends, 8 from all of my interior guys. And it's like, you don't know what's going on or where it's coming from. You can't identify it, but you just know at some point, somebody on that defensive line is going to make a play.
Right.
But like you said, I'll buy it based upon how you talked about it and unique to Notre Dame. Yes.
I still believe the elite edge is still the biggest weapon for a defense in college football. I still believe that. If you can dominate the edge of the line of scrimmage. And I say as a quarterback, it's really hard when it's coming up the middle, but there just aren't a lot of guys that are just going to consistently dominate like that.
Well, first of all, how many people have that combination of Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham?
Exactly. So, yeah, we're all on the same page. I love that. Absolutely love that. So, end of the story. We got a couple super chats here, guys, that I want to get to before we get out of here. Shaun, I have an idea of what our next RTCF show is going to be. It's that text I just sent you about the contract negotiations by Nico. It's also why I keep telling you guys Tennessee will never. That's why they'll never win under Josh Heupel, is because that's how that program is run. That's the kind of players they have in that program.
The way you get them is the way you lose them.
Exactly. Bingo. So we're going to get to that, Shaun. That'll be a topic of conversation on Monday. But that end of the story, moral of the story, guys, is coming out of the spring, I'm way more confident now that the defense is going to continue their success than I was. I was confident going into the spring because of the talent It's just been enhanced. And it's enhanced just on what we saw. And that's what I'm saying. Is like, I'm not even talking about Boubacar and Botelho and Jalen Stroman coming back and doing some things. I hope that happens. That's how this team makes their full potential. But I'm confident that this defense can be just as good as it was last year with just the players we've seen this spring. And if those guys come back, that's how you then become better than you were last year. Because this defense has a chance to be better than it was last year. Not because the players are better, the coach is better. It's to what you talked about earlier, Shaun. You hope that this defense doesn't have to overcome losing their top 2 Vipers to season-ending injuries by Game 5. Your returning All-American D tackle is never healthy all season. Your in-season All-American goes down in the first playoff game. You lose your All-American cornerback in Game 6. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff with Notre Dame last year. You don't think they're going – I've never seen a scenario where that happens twice in a row to a team. I've never seen it at Notre Dame. So I assume it's not going to happen again. And I hope that continues to be the case. But I'm certainly excited about this group, much more certainty about this group than I have about the offense. I think both have a chance to be really good this year. But I think this defense has a shot. And that's most important, guys, because I think in September, on August 31st, and then 2 weeks later, the first home game against A&M, that's how you win those games. Not because whoever your quarterback is in midseason form or because your offensive lines, you're going to win because your defense is going to say, yeah, I know A&M's really good, but we only got to get to 14 to win the game. You know what I mean? Like, that's going to be the key, is the defense remaining dominant like it's been. And if they do that, then I think we're going to have another really fun season. So did have a couple super chats that I wanted to get to, guys, before we get out of here. We had one from Salty Virginia Peanuts. He says, continue to come correct, IB. Hope to see you Saturday. This is an IB Boards guest membership for 1 month to Insured by Big. Let's see what he does on the boards. And if he says stays, he should be I don't even know what that is. But he is actually already a member. So, yes, Insured by Big is already a paid member. So I appreciate that. So I may have to use that super chat to comp somebody else one of these days, Salty. You just never know. I appreciate that. And then we also had one from Packer Fan Total Access. Thank you for super chat. In a perfect world, what percentage of carries would you want Love and Price to have this season? Feel free to add a third. So what percentage of the carries would you want Love and Price to have this year? We can do it. You guys can answer it one of two ways. One is just total carries, so that includes mop-up time and all that. Or you can just look at it from more of when the game is on the line. So not because, end of the season carries, you're going to have some from your third or fourth string running back who it was when the game was in doubt. Love and Price had already come out or whatever. When you talk about it, let's say it's a 4-quarter game. What percentage of the carries do you want to have the running backs? You can go at it either way. Shaun, I'll start with you, and then Trev will end with you.
If I'm just going to go with the top 3, 45, 35, 45, 35, 20. 45, 35, 20. I might even creep it up to 50, 30, 20. And I'm basing that based upon the words of Jawan Sider, where he's pretty much like your best players got to be on the field, especially on third down, especially at the biggest moments of the game. Like, if that's the way he feels, then I'll say 45. I'd be comfortable with 45, 35, 20, because I do think Aeneas Williams' role steps up, because I think he's proven to himself. He just talked about it recently, how important the success in the playoff was for him and the confidence he gained from it. So let me tell you something, man. As much as we talk about loving seeing Jadarian Price get more opportunities, JD better be looking over his shoulders, man. There's some young guys coming for some more carries. That's because we talk about him getting more carries and as the second guy, and then we sometimes just overlook Jabron Payne as if he's not a solid running back, especially on third downs in special situations. not, down to down. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and rank. I don't want to do that. Sit here and rank the running backs, anything like that. But I'll just stick to my original point. Those young running backs, speaking of Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young specifically, I think they're they're going to be trying to find a way to eat into those percentages. But if I just go by the three guys that played last year, I'm cool with 45, 35, 20.
I just want to respond to one thing, Shaun. You talk about Jabron Payne. Trevor and I have talked about Jabron Payne this spring quite a bit. The problem is Jabron Payne is evidence of what the risk is when you are part of a loaded room, which is when you do get injured, you get passed up. And now Jabron's battling to get back into that role. And the thing that works out well for Jabron is that there is a new position coach, because it's kind of like you're all starting over from scratch. So what you did last year doesn't matter as much as maybe it would have if there was a returning situation. But I know this channel doesn't overlook Jabron, but I do think as a whole, I think as a fan base as a whole, I don't think he gets talked about as much because he's old. He's an older player, and we tend to focus on the younger players in those situations. So I think that's fair. Trev, how about you?
Yeah, that's a good question, Packer fan. And I think I had to look at some numbers first because the leading carrier on the team last year was Riley Leonard with 184. And there's been a lot of conversation around how his will be divvied up. This isn't an exact science. I'm just kind of guesstimating here, but I added the running backs last year carried the ball 351 times, and that's from Jeremiah Love to Devin Ford. I gave an additional 100 carries to the running backs based off of what Riley Leonard did. And I'm saying the other 84 is split up between sacks and passing attempts over the course of a season. And so you're looking at like 450. I would be comfortable if Jeremiah Love, if he saw from a carry standpoint, I'd be comfortable if he saw somewhere in that 45% to 50% range. Honestly, with how different the running game is going to look this year. Jadarian Price somewhere around that 30 to 40 range, somewhere in there. And then I think Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young are going to see like a relatively even split in terms of percentages, but they're going to come differently. Like I think Aeneas, you'd be more willing to line him up in the backfield and give him some carries on, say, 1st and 10 from your own 30. But I think Kedron Young is going to see a lot of short yardage carries because they're going to need somebody in that offense to kind of take over that Riley Leonard. I mean, I watched the Riley Leonard, John Gruden QB camp thing, and he had something like 68 rushing first downs last season. Like that's a lot. And so that's going to have to come from somewhere. I'm not saying that all 68 of those are going to go to Kedron.
PFF, that's where that came from.
Yeah.
68.
I mean,
now some of those were scrambles.
Yep.
But that's still a lot.
That's, and I think that
real quick, Jeremiah was next at 47. That's a big gap.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, some of Jeremiah Love's like first down runs were, I don't know if they count those long touchdown runs as them, but like technically he picked up a first down on some of those really long rushes. So I don't know how much of those factored in, but point being, some of those are going to have to be picked up by somebody, and I could see Kedron Young throwing his name into that mix. So I would say probably, somewhere around that 35 to 45% range or probably somewhere in between that 40 to 50% range for Jeremiah Love, somewhere to that 30 to 40 range for JD Price, and then the remaining carries divvied up between Aeneas Williams, Kedron Young, and I'm also not going to count out Nolan James. I mean, he could work his way on and get some, especially late in games. Notre Dame now has the experience of playing a 16-game season. Jeremiah Love, outside of the Virginia game where he carried the ball 16 times, he was right around that like 10, 11 mark, and he still got banged up at the end of the regular season. Kind of a freak injury, and I'm not saying they're going to now limit him to, all right, dude, we want you to be healthy come playoff time, so we're going to give you the ball 7 times today. I don't think it's going to be like that, but I could see Nolan James playing this year as well. So that's where I'm at with that one.
So I love that you brought that stat up, Trev, because I got something for you on that.
Yeah.
So Riley Leonard, 39% of Riley Leonard's attempts went for first downs, 39%. Now, you're always going to be higher on that percentage because those include scrambles, but
Sure.
it gives you some context. Jeremiah Love, 29% of his carries resulted in first downs. 26% of Aeneas Williams' carries resulted in first downs. 23% of Jadarian Price's carries resulted in first downs. 43% of Kedron Young's carries last year went for first downs. Running behind the second-team offensive line. Now, again, sometimes they're going against second-team defenses, but that dude is going to be a factor for Notre Dame this year. Here's my breakdown, guys. I'm at 50 for Love. I'm at 30 for Price. I'm at 5% for the quarterbacks and 15% for the other backs. And I'm giving that percentage in a game in doubt scenarios. It may look different. I don't think Jeremiah Love's going to have 50% of the overall team carries because there will be some garbage game, carries that I don't count. I'm talking about in-game, games on the line, because like the Fermo efficiency index doesn't count garbage snaps as part of his equations. So I'm kind of using that here as well. I'm going to go Jeremiah 50%. I'd be curious what his number was last year in non-garbage times. That'd actually be an interesting thing to look up, which none of us are going to take the time to do because that's a lot of flipping work. But I mean, Shaun, like you said, your best players got to touch the ball more. I think 50% of the snaps in non-garbage minutes won't be 230 carries like the math that you were doing, Trev. If you look at the season total carries, 50% of the season total carries would be like 220. That's a lot of carries. But like you said, there's garbage time carries that he wouldn't be getting 50% of that.
Yeah.
It would be a little bit lower. But, look, if he's up to 180, 200, okay, he's your dude. I also think his number would have been higher had he not been injured in the entire playoffs. I think that's a factor too. I don't think there's no scenario in my opinion, where Jeremiah Love only carries the ball 6 times against Georgia, 8 times against Indiana, and 4 times against Ohio State if he's healthy. I just don't see it. So that's kind of where I'm at. So I go 50, 30, 15 for the other backs, and then 5 for the quarterbacks. Because I think there will be times that the quarterback runs the ball, read zone, quarterback sneaks, things along those lines. We'll still see some of that, I believe, this year. So that's kind of how I have it. So, and how do I define garbage time? Your first team offense isn't on the field anymore. That's what garbage says. As long as your starters are on the field, you're viewing that as the game is still in doubt to some degree. It's basically when you pull the starters. And so the reason it's hard to count, because you can't just subtract Kedron's carries, and because some of Jadarian's carries came in those situations, some of Aeneas's carries came in those situations. So it's hard to calculate that completely by just subtracting Kenny Minchie's carries and Kedron Young's carries and things like that. So that's where I'm at on that one. So that's a really good question.
That is.
And it's going to be interesting. That's something I wouldn't even mind tracking this year is carry percentage of the carry breakdown. We might have to think about that. So let me make that little note. I have to do that. So, hey guys, that's going to do it. Listen, folks, we are going to be back at 5:00. I'm going to be back with Shaun Stiers. We're going to have a recruiting breakdown at 5:00. We're going to discuss at 4:00. Rodney Dunham is going to make his decision between Notre Dame, Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Duke. And he's going to announce that at 4:00. We'll go live at 5 to break it all down. So you're definitely going to join us there at 5:00 on the Irish Breakdown channel. Before you all go, please do us a favor. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that. And if you haven't done so, I'm telling you guys, not only are you missing out on the best way to support what we're doing at Irish Breakdown, but you are missing on so much great conversation, intel, analysis, all of that by not being part of the premium board on the Champions Lounge, which you can find at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Shaun, thanks so much for joining us today, my friend. Trevor, excellent job today. For my guys, we will see you guys again. I'll see you in about an hour and 20 minutes. The rest, Shaun will see you Monday. We're going to have a little RTCF on Monday. And then Trev and I will be back tomorrow for our mailbag at 1:00. So join us then. Have an awesome rest of your day, everybody. Trev will see you tomorrow. I'll see you in a little over an hour, and we'll talk to you again on the Irish Breakdown podcast.